Welcome to Eternal Dread, where fear never sleeps. Tell us where you're watching from and what time it is, because terror has no limits. If you're brave enough, share and comment, but beware, something might be watching you too. Now, turn off the lights and let the dread begin. Have you ever followed a rule without knowing why? A rule that seemed pointless at first, but carried an unspoken weight. A silent warning that made the back of your neck prickle? Some rules are there to protect you. Others exist to protect something else from getting out. I learned that the hard way. My time as a park ranger wasn't what I expected. It wasn't about guiding lost hikers, protecting wildlife, or enjoying peaceful nights under the stars. It was about survival, about obeying rules that felt less like guidelines and more like whispered prayers. At Black Hollow National Park, the rules weren't there to keep us safe. They were there to keep something else in. I never planned to end up at Black Hollow. It wasn't on my list of places to apply. I hadn't even heard of it before. But after months of job hunting, after sending out resume after resume and receiving nothing but polite rejections or silence, my phone rang. "We reviewed your application," a man's voice said, flat and to the point. "We'd like you to start immediately. No interview, no questions, no follow-ups, just a job offer, dropped into my lap like I had been chosen for something without knowing why. It didn't sit right, but I couldn't afford to be picky. My savings were drying up, and rent was due. So I packed my bags, filled up my car, and drove into the mountains toward a place that seemed to exist outside of time. The deeper I went, the more the world seemed to shift. The roads narrowed. The trees grew taller, denser, pressing in from both sides as if they were watching. By the time I reached the ranger station, I felt like I had crossed some invisible threshold, like I had left behind the world I knew. The station itself was small, an old wooden building nestled between towering pines. It looked like it had been standing there for decades, untouched by modern hands. My new supervisor, Ranger Dalton, was waiting for me outside. Dalton was a broad-shouldered man in his 50s, with a weathered face and eyes that had seen too much. He didn't waste time with small talk. A firm handshake, a gruff nod, and he led me inside. The first part of our meeting was exactly what I expected. Rules about campers, wildlife safety, emergency protocols. I listened, nodded, and took notes. Then, just as I thought we were done, he pulled out a single folded piece of paper and slid it across the desk. "These are the park's special rules," he said, his voice low. I hesitated before unfolding it. The paper felt worn, creased from being handled too many times. The list inside wasn't long, but every rule sent a chill down my spine. 1. Do not enter the forest between 2:13 a.m. and 3:33 a.m. If you are inside during this time, leave immediately. 2. If you see a woman in white standing at the tree line, do not approach. Do not speak to her. Do not let her see you blink. 3. Ignore any voices calling your name from the trees. No one should be out there after dark. 4. If you hear whistling between midnight and dawn, go inside. Lock the doors. Wait until it stops. 5. If a man in a park ranger uniform asks you for help past sunset, do not follow him. He is not one of us. 6. Do not look directly at the fire watchtower after midnight. If you see lights on, close your eyes and count to 10 before looking away. 7. If you find a deer standing completely still, staring at you, do not break eye contact. Back away slowly. Do not turn your back on it. Their reach ends with the sunrise. I looked up, expecting a smirk, some indication that this was just an elaborate joke for the new guy. But Dalton's face was unreadable, his expression carved from stone. "This is some kind of initiation, right?" I asked, forcing a laugh. Trying to scare the rookie? He didn't blink. "Follow them, or you won't last long here." Something in his tone, low, unwavering, dead serious, sent a cold shiver down my spine. I wanted to push back, to ask what he meant, but the weight of his gaze made me swallow my words. I told myself it was just a weird tradition, some local superstition meant to freak out newcomers. But still I followed the rules, just in case. For the first few nights, nothing happened. The air was still, the forest eerily quiet, and I started to believe maybe it was all nonsense. Maybe Dalton and the others were just messing with me. Then, everything changed. It was my 5th night on the job. I was in the ranger station, finishing up paperwork, when I heard it. A whistle. Low and slow, a tuneless melody drifting through the open window. My entire body went rigid. My brain scrambled for an explanation, Wind through the trees, maybe a bird, but deep down I knew. Rule number 4. If you hear whistling between midnight and dawn, go inside. Lock the doors. Wait until it stops. Heart pounding, I reached for the window and slammed it shut. My hands trembled as I locked the door and turned off the lights. The whistling didn't stop. It circled the station, moving closer, then farther away, weaving through the trees like something searching, like something calling. I held my breath. Seconds stretched into minutes. My ears strained in the darkness, every muscle in my body locked in place. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. I didn't sleep after that, and I knew, without a doubt, that Black Hollow's rules weren't just superstition. They were warnings, and something out there was waiting for me to break them. 2 nights later, my shift was almost over when I found myself near the eastern tree line. The air was thick with silence, the kind that made every footstep sound too loud. Every breath felt like it disturbed something unseen. My flashlight cut through the dark, sweeping over the towering pines and the dense undergrowth. Then I saw it, something pale, barely visible between the trees. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, maybe the moon reflecting off a patch of fog or the smooth bark of a birch tree. But as I stepped closer, I realized it wasn't a trick. A woman stood there. She wore a long white dress, the fabric draping loosely around her body, unmoving despite the faint breeze whispering through the branches. Her posture was unnaturally stiff, rigid, as if she had been standing there for hours, watching me. A slow, crawling dread slithered up my spine. I raised my flashlight, my fingers tightening around it. The beam cut through the dark and landed on her face. My stomach plummeted. She had no eyes, just 2 hollow sockets, dark, endless voids that swallowed the light, reflecting nothing back. Every instinct screamed at me to run. My legs locked in place, my breathing turned shallow. Then, through the rising panic, a thought clawed its way to the front of my mind. Rule number 2. If you see a woman in white, do not approach. Do not speak to her. Do not let her see you blink. I forced myself to stay still. My vision blurred as my eyes burned, my lungs tightening with the desperate need to blink. It felt unnatural, unbearable, like my body was rebelling against me. Then she moved. Her head tilted, slow and deliberate, as if she was listening for something. A soft, almost curious motion. I felt like an animal caught in a predator's gaze. Then, just as silently, she stepped back. Another step. And then, as if the darkness itself swallowed her whole, she was gone. The second she disappeared, my body gave in. My eyes slammed shut, burning tears spilling down my face as I sucked in a shuddering breath. But I was still standing. I was alive. I fumbled for my radio with shaking hands, pressing the button with more force than necessary. "Dalton," I rasped, my voice barely above a whisper. "I saw her." A long pause. Then his voice crackled through. "You didn't blink, right?" His tone was sharp, urgent. "No." "Good." A breath. "Go back inside." I didn't argue. I couldn't. A week passed, but the fear never left me. Every night, I patrolled with a careful, measured silence, my mind constantly circling back to her. To those empty sockets. To the way she moved, like something that wasn't supposed to exist in this world. I followed the rules religiously. Every single one. But that didn't mean I felt safe. It was close to midnight when I finished my last patrol of the evening. The path leading back to the ranger station was empty, the trees looming on either side, their branches reaching toward the sky like skeletal fingers. The only sound was the crunch of my boots against the dirt trail. Suddenly, I saw a figure, standing near the trailhead, dressed in the familiar olive-green uniform of a park ranger. He wasn't moving, just standing there, waiting. I slowed my steps. Something was off. Even in the dim light, I could tell I didn't recognize him, and I knew every ranger assigned to Black Hollow. He raised a hand and waved. "Hey, can you help me with something?" His voice was smooth. Too smooth. I stopped in my tracks. My mind raced, searching for an explanation. Maybe a ranger from another district? Maybe someone new? But then, deep in my gut, I felt it wrong. Something about his tone, his posture, the way he stood too still, sent every instinct screaming. Then the words surfaced in my mind. Rule number 5. If a man in a park ranger uniform asks for help past sunset, do not follow him. My mouth went dry. My pulse pounded in my ears. "What do you need?" I asked carefully, my voice barely above a whisper. The man smiled, but it wasn't a real smile. It stretched across his face in a way that didn't seem natural, the skin pulling too tightly over his cheekbones. His lips curled upward, but his eyes, empty and unblinking, held nothing behind them. "Just come with me," he said, his voice too calm, too empty. I stepped back. He stepped forward. Then his face shifted. Not like an expression changing. No. His skin moved, like something underneath was trying to adjust, trying to fit itself into human form. My stomach twisted. I turned and ran. The station was less than 100 yards away, but it felt like miles. My boots pounded against the dirt, my breath coming in sharp gasps. I didn't dare look back. I reached the door and practically threw myself inside, slamming it shut, twisting the lock with trembling fingers. My body was shaking so violently I could barely breathe. Then my radio crackled. Dalton's voice. "Did he talk to you?" I swallowed, forcing my breath to steady. "Yes," I whispered. A long pause. "Did you follow him?" "No." Silence. Then finally Dalton spoke again. "Good." Another pause. Longer this time. Then quietly he said, "Get some rest." But how could I? Because now I knew there was more than one thing in Black Hollow. And some of them wore our faces. By now, I followed every rule like my life depended on it, because I was starting to believe it did. I had now memorized the paper that held the rules by heart, because breaking even one of them could cost me my life. One night, I was hiking a remote trail, far from the main paths, where the trees pressed in close, and the only sound was my own footsteps crunching against fallen leaves. The air was cold, still, untouched by the usual sounds of the forest. No birds. No insects. Just silence. Then ahead of me on the trail, I saw a massive buck. Its antlers stretched wide, jagged like twisted branches. Its body was eerily still, its legs locked in place as if it had been frozen mid-step. It didn't move, didn't flick its ears, didn't even breathe. It just stared. A deep, unsettling feeling crawled over my skin. Then, like a reflex, my mind pulled up another rule. Rule number 7. If you find a deer standing completely still, staring at you, do not break eye contact. Back away slowly. Do not turn your back. A pulse of fear shot through me. I forced my muscles to stay still, to resist the instinct to run. Carefully, I took a slow step backward. The deer's mouth opened. A sound came out. Not a grunt. Not the sharp, startled cry deer sometimes make. A voice. A garbled, broken whisper. "You shouldn't be here." My body seized with terror. The words were wrong, warped, stretched, almost human but not quite. The sound slithered into my ears like something that didn't belong in this world. I couldn't help it. I turned and ran. Footsteps, no hooves, pounded against the dirt behind me. I didn't dare look back. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I didn't stop until I saw the ranger station in the distance. Only then did I allow myself to glance over my shoulder. The trail was empty. The sun was up, but the silence still clung to the air, suffocating and heavy. I never used that trail again. 3 months later, I quit. I didn't need any more signs. I didn't need to understand. I just knew I had to leave. Dalton didn't try to stop me. He didn't ask why. He just nodded, his expression unreadable. Not everyone can handle it. As I packed up my things, a question gnawed at me, something I had avoided asking since the first night. But now, on the verge of leaving, I couldn't hold it in. The rules. I hesitated, gripping the strap of my backpack. They're not to protect us from the park, are they? Dalton let out a slow breath, rubbing a hand over his face. "No," he said finally, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. "They're to protect the park from us." A shiver ran down my spine. I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't want to know. I just got in my car, drove out of Black Hollow, and never looked back. And no matter where I go, no matter how much time has passed, I never, ever break a rule again. I don't care what people say. There's nothing wrong with loving yourself. People pretend humility is attractive, but deep down, they want confidence. They need someone to admire. I built my brand on that. Looking good, feeling good, being better. But the truth? I wasn't at the top. Not yet. I hovered just below the real influencers, the ones who got high-end PR packages, who were invited to Fashion Week, who never had to chase a viral moment because the moment always seemed to find them. For me, growth was work. Strategic hashtags, posting at peak times, buying engagement pods. And no matter what I did, I was always playing catch-up. Especially with Natalie. She had 560K followers, brand deals with every luxury skincare brand, and a face that just looked expensive. Her selfies were always perfectly lit, her captions effortlessly relatable. And she didn't try. That was the worst part. I spent years clawing my way up to 45,000 followers, struggling for engagement, curating everything, while she made a pouty face at brunch and got 80,000 likes in 10 minutes. Then last month, she'd met me. "You're still doing this, Amanda? You work so hard for so little. Have you considered just, chilling?" I stared at my screen, my jaw clenched so tight it ached. She wasn't even trying to be mean. That's what made it worse. I needed something big, something that would push me ahead. And then I found the mirror. Getting evicted should have been stressful. But honestly, it was a blessing. My old place was a shithole. It looked expensive, floor-to-ceiling windows, marble countertops, but the appliances barely worked, and the lighting? Horrific for selfies. The new apartment was perfect. Brand new. Bigger. A real influencer aesthetic. High ceilings, sleek finishes, everything bright and clean and modern. And the walk-in wardrobe? I could have cried. It was massive, an entire room just for my clothes and skincare. I barely noticed the furniture when I first stepped in, just the space. The potential. Then I saw the mirror. It was already there, set against the far wall. Tall, antique, framed in thick gold, curling at the edges like ivy. The glass was smooth and pristine, so clear it almost shimmered like water. It looked expensive, the kind of thing you'd find in a palace. I figured the last tenant must have left it behind. Or maybe the apartment complex had staged it there. Either way, it was gorgeous. And when I stepped in front of it, I looked flawless. My cheekbones sharper, my lips fuller, my waist more defined. The lighting hit me just right, like some divine force was highlighting my best features. I snapped a selfie, then another, then 50 more. And when I posted them, they blew up. At first, it was magic. The moment that first selfie went up, my numbers exploded. 15,000 likes in an hour. 100 DMs, Natalie commenting. PR brands suddenly noticing me. My notifications wouldn't stop. "Oh my god, you look insane. Drop the skincare routine, queen. Your face is giving supermodel RN. Literally a goddess." Every post I made soared. My follower count climbed 50K, then 80K, then 102K. Every morning, I'd wake up, sip my collagen matcha, and admire myself in the mirror. I looked perfect, but then things started feeling off. It started small, a flicker in the reflection, like my image was lagging behind me. I laughed it off. Glitches happen, right? But then it started smiling when I wasn't. Just for a second. A quick, too wide grin that disappeared the moment I moved. I told myself I was imagining things, but then I started looking different. Not in the mirror. No, there, I still looked perfect. It was everywhere else. Natalie started getting more engagement again. She'd post something casual, morning glow #Namacup, and get 120,000 likes in 20 minutes. Meanwhile, my numbers started slipping. First, my engagement dropped. My likes halved, then halved again. The comments changed. "Are you okay? You look tired. Girl, something is off. Wait, is this filter or?" I stared at the screen, my fingers trembling. What the fuck were they talking about? I rushed to the mirror. I looked fine. No, better than fine. My reflection was still flawless. But then I saw it. A flicker. My mirrored self was still smiling. I wasn't. I started checking the mirror constantly. The rest of my life fell away. DMs unanswered, deals ignored. I barely left my apartment. I spent hours in the wardrobe, studying myself. My hair looked dull now. My lips thinner. My jawline softening. I tried every product. Serums. Exfoliants. Ice baths. Nothing helped. And then one night, when I was standing there staring, I heard it. A whisper. "Ugly." I staggered back, my breath ragged. The mirror was silent. But the word was still inside me. The last time I posted, I needed reassurance. I needed them to tell me I was still beautiful. I posted a selfie with the caption, "Feeling a little off today, but we pushed through." The likes crawled. My notifications were slow. The comments. "Is she okay? What the fuck happened to her? This is kinda sad to be honest. Girl, get some sleep, you look dead." I deleted it. Then I went to the mirror. And I stayed there. My reflection wasn't moving anymore. It just stood there, still as a photograph. It was smiling. It was. I'm back now. You know, it's funny. Sometimes we don't see ourselves clearly until we really look. But I see myself now. I see everything. I feel better. Confident. Whole. And Amanda? Oh, don't worry about her. She's still here. I can see her now, pounding against the glass, her mouth forming silent little screams. Her eyes are wide, frantic. It's adorable, really, the way she still thinks she exists. But that's the thing about mirrors. There's only room for one reflection. And it's mine now. Anyway, I think I'll post a selfie soon. You're going to love it. My name is Keith Werlener and my family, and I just moved to upstate New York. The house we live in is rather old. Ever since we moved in, I've had this feeling of dread, especially in my bedroom. Just 7 days ago, I saw a woman coming out of the hatch in my room. I then passed out. When I woke up, the hatch was shut as it always is, but there were scratch marks right next to the hatch, as if something pulled itself out. I told my parents, but they said it was just a bad dream, and that my dog Decker probably made the scratches. At school, a kid sat by me and said, "So you moved into the forbidden house, forbidden house?" I asked. She then said, "Long ago, a woman that was rumored to be pure evil fell into a hatch somewhere in the house. They didn't find her until her sister came to visit. Her sister dropped dead in fear after seeing the state the woman was in. The sister landed on the hatch door, sealing it shut again, and the key was lost while removing the sister's body from the scene. They say the woman died, but not her wickedness. They say she haunts the house and will go after whoever gets the room with the hatch." "Boo, but I have the room with the hatch," I say, shaken up. "That's bad. You haven't had any weird experiences involving the hatch, right?" She asks. "Well, I had a dream where a creepy woman was crawling out of the hatch, but when I woke up there were fresh scratches outside the hatch." "Oh my, whatever you do, don't go near the hatch. Scream at the top of your damn lungs if you see her." "Okay," I reply. Later on, when I was heading home, I saw her peeking through my window. She was in my room. I ran into my house. I sped up to my room, but she was gone. That was 6 days ago. When I went to bed last night, I woke up to her standing by my bed. I screamed in terror, but she just dragged me to the basement. I hear the screams of agony upstairs. She got my parents, she got my sister. I hear a knock at the front door. I remember inviting my friend from school to help me. Now I wish I never did. I hear my friend scream in agony. I hear blood splattering. I hear something heavy thud against a wall. The screams stopped. I woke up. It's perfect here. We are all a happy family in the hatch. I'm sorry I told you my story, because she can get into your mind. She will make you head towards our home. You can try to resist. It won't work. Getting torn apart only hurts a bit. It's well worth it. Hopefully you aren't weak-gutted, because there's a lot of blood when you first come inside. But the hatch is just so perfect. It's going to be your home. Soon come on down, join our happy family. You'll really love it. Just trust me. It's perfection. It's the place of dreams. Don't resist her powers. Don't you damn dare to deny her. For she is perfection. She is my life. See you in the hatch soon. Mushroom tunnels. My girlfriend and I decided to visit what's known as the most haunted town in Australia. Since we only lived an hour away, we thought it'd be the perfect opportunity to check out the infamous mushroom tunnels, one of the biggest paranormal hotspots in the area. We arrived around 11 p.m. and had to sneak through a bend in the fence to get in. There were 3 trails ahead of us, and we had no idea which one led to the tunnels, so we just took the first one. Right away, I felt uneasy, way more than I expected. I had been wanting to visit this place for months, and now that I was finally here, I should have been excited. But instead, there was this overwhelming eeriness, a kind I had never felt before. Before coming, I had been reading my girlfriend some stories about the tunnels. People had reported seeing shadow figures, strange lights, and even satanic cults performing rituals. So, as we walked that first trail, I was already on edge, feeling like something could jump out at any second. And yet, despite it being a 99% full moon, we still couldn't see a thing. Eventually, we reached the end of the trail, only to find nothing. Just endless open fields. Annoyed, we checked social media and realized we had taken the wrong path. Trail 2 was the one that actually led to the tunnels. That meant walking all the way back down. When we reached the starting point again and faced the 3 trails once more, something about Trail 2 felt immediately wrong. I thought the first trail had been dark, but this was on another level. It was pure blackness, like the trail itself absorbed light. All we had for illumination was our phone flashlight, which barely helped at all. As we hesitantly walked forward, a large sign suddenly came into view: the mushroom tunnels. At this point, I turned to my girlfriend and straight up asked if she wanted to leave. The energy here was unbearable, and for the first time, I seriously considered turning back. But then I had a moment of clarity. I had been waiting for this night for months. I was finally here. I had to at least step inside. So I turned back toward the tunnel and walked a little closer. That's when my girlfriend suddenly said, "That's the tunnel right there." I followed her gaze. I saw it, and I ran. I can't explain what I saw. It's like my eyes registered something, but my brain refused to process it. The only thing I knew in that moment was that I needed to get the hell out of there. My girlfriend caught up to me, her face pale. She swore she saw a figure standing in the middle of the tunnel, staring directly at us. I'll never truly know if that's what I saw too, but whatever it was, my body reacted before my mind could catch up. But that wasn't even the scariest part. After sprinting back to the car, we jumped in, locked the doors, and turned on the ignition. I went to connect my phone to Bluetooth, and then the most gut-wrenching, horrific sound blasted from the speakers. I can't even describe it properly. It was low, distorted, and deeply unsettling. My girlfriend immediately felt sick and begged me to turn it off, but I knew I had to capture it. And that's the end of our story. But something tells me that place isn't done with us yet. Hello everyone. I was asked to follow up on what's been going on in my life. I apologize for cutting things off at random the last time. I didn't anticipate her returning home from the prosecutor's office so early. I can't let her find out I'm writing this, or I'll end up in the basement. As I previously stated, I have been dropping small seeds so that you can completely understand my situation. If I told you everything at once, no one would believe me. She'd find out and I'd become yet another missing person. People need to know what's going on and why my wife is to blame. If you asked me what she was, I'd probably say a variety of things, some of which would be in a foreign language that has been forgotten over time and is too dangerous for you to repeat. In actuality, I have no idea who or what she is. At least, I am unable to comprehend it. It gives me a headache if I think about it too much, so I try not to. All I can do is share what I saw or experienced. You will have to make your own judgment. Snow angels. You have no idea how much I detest snow. It is a complete annoyance to me as a working adult. I don't get delayed openings or snow days. I get a warning for arriving late. Perhaps I simply despise my fucking job. My mind is racing with ideas of changing departments or finding a new career as I dig my car out from under the white cover. Something in the snow catches my attention as I work to remove the ice off my windshield. Footsteps. A line of them heading directly into our property. The only item in my backyard is my shed, which will not see any human interaction until spring. I followed the tracks behind my house. The human-sized footprints appear to be dispersed haphazardly across my yard. Last night, the snow only began to fall at about 8 p.m., and it wasn't until about 11 p.m. that it began to accumulate. This individual must have spent hours wandering around in the snow in my backyard. It would be an understatement to say it was eerie. The prints also ranged in size, from as small as a baby's feet to as large as a 6-foot male. The fact that the individual was also barefoot was quite unsettling. I glanced to the window overlooking the backyard from our bedroom. The tracks left just beneath the window caused my eyes to widen. I approached the window cautiously, keeping my eyes on the footsteps as though I were approaching an animal from behind. I entered the tracks. The footprints dwarfed my size 11 boots. The footprints had a slight snow cover. I could practically see the grass. This individual, whomever it was, had been standing here for quite some time. It appears that I should get some security cameras. In the labyrinth of footsteps in my backyard, I could see a trail of footprints headed towards the woods. Curiosity killed more than just a cat, as I found myself following the tracks into the cold woodland. A snowstorm has left the forest rather calm. Most animals are sheltering in their dens, concentrating on staying warm. Animals who missed the chance to eat the day before the storm would have to scrounge around the winter wonderland for food that is either stowed away in their warm houses or too buried to find. As though they had disappeared, the tracks blend into the woods. A gentle drip-drop drew my attention, dripping slowly but steadily. Rain? But after a winter storm like that, it couldn't be. Perhaps the snow is melting? Given how cold and overcast the weather is right now, it couldn't be. I felt my heart sink when I looked up into the trees. I left without verifying my observations. I simply ran, or rather sprinted, back to my house quicker than I had ever done before. I hurried inside and didn't pause to respond to my wife's sleepy questions before calling the police. I walked up to my window and gazed up at the green of the tree tops blanketed in snow. Among the branches, I could still make out the shadowy black shapes of their bent bodies. After I got off the phone with the police, I told my wife what I had discovered in the woods. I could barely keep my breakfast down as I recounted what had transpired from the start. My mind is reliving the graphic scene. Sophia's frown widened as I progressed through the story. It was not a look of terror or disgust, but rather displeasure, like a child caught toying with something that they weren't supposed to. "Why did you have to call the police?" she muttered with annoyance. "Why the hell would I not?" She sucked her teeth and rolled her eyes. "You know how I feel having cops crawling all over the neighborhood. They did the same thing with our neighbors. It turns into a whole big mess that ends up with media breathing down my neck. They're going to be asking what we're doing to catch the Benny Park slashers." I couldn't be more confused. "What?" I questioned. "That's what they're calling them now. Everyone thinks they're the reason behind the murders and disappearances. As far as I'm concerned, another town fairy tale and more headaches in the form of ignorant emails and letters from the residents. Is she more worried about tabloid rumors than the two corpses that aren't even 500 feet away from our home?" I couldn't believe it was her biggest concern. I assumed she was making a cruel joke, and I watched for a smirk, but she stayed frowning. A knock on our front door signaled the arrival of the cops. With a wave, I left the room. "Well, sorry for disturbing your peace, Princess," I called back sarcastically. "It won't happen again," she quietly responded. She thought I couldn't hear her. The cops asked more questions than I had answers to. They too were perplexed by the various sized footprints in my property. Crime scene cleanup filled white bins and bags with the scraps of what they could salvage from the trees. Yes, I meant to use the word scraps, since I saw what those guys in hazmat suits were putting in the white totes. Their bodies resembled the discarded skin of a newly peeled potato. I promised myself that I would never again venture into those woods. New puppy. So we got a puppy. Roscoe, a chocolate lab, was a voracious little demon. If you allowed him, that thing would devour the couch. It was me who even proposed it. I promised it would breathe new life into our home, as we had no intentions for a baby anytime soon. Sophia initially resisted. Almost every time I brought it up, she shut me down. We were eating dinner when I received the surprise. "Is that barking?" I looked up from my plate, confused. My wife's face was creased with a teasing smirk. At first, she twisted more spaghetti around her fork, ignoring my question. Her gray eyes met my brown ones, and she couldn't help but giggle. "Well, aren't you going to go investigate it, Mr. Man of the House?" she smiles. The barking emanated from the restroom. I cautiously twisted the knob and was welcomed with playful yaps from a small brown dot of fur. Dropping to my knees, I gathered the little guy in my arms. His tongue attacked me, licking everything in its path. "You're the cutest thing on this planet," I told him as I walked back to the kitchen. My wife was still seated at the table, enjoying her Italian dinner. I stood in front of her, puppy in my arms. "What the heck, Sophia? Why didn't you tell me you got a dog?" I confront, slowly rocking the puppy. Something tells me you're not actually mad." "Of course not. I just thought you didn't want a pet." "Well, I damn near changed my mind when I brought him home, and that little bastard kept growling and barking at me." I gasped at my wife before pulling the puppy closer to my chest. "She didn't mean that, little guy. I'm sure your daddy and mommy have a very beautiful marriage." Sophia rolls her eyes. "You're unbelievable," she snorts. "What should we name him?" "Money Burner," she scoffs. "You should have seen how much he was." Tempting, but I think Roscoe would fit him better. Our third housemate, Roscoe, was, to put it mildly, a pain in the ass. He would urinate everywhere, everywhere, so we couldn't leave him alone for even 10 minutes. I placed him in a large kennel to at least confine his frequent pee breaks to one area. It was probably a severe case of separation anxiety, according to the veterinarian, which is the worst case scenario for two full-time employed adults. Roscoe had twice as many advantages as disadvantages, so I wasn't ready to give up on him. Okay, so that's a bit of an exaggeration, but I can't deny that he was a complete joy. I think he helped me get over some of my childhood traumas. Every opportunity one had, I played with him. The fact that he enjoyed being outside in the snow is a little odd for a lab, but I'm sure he was sick of spending all day in a box. In fact, he only engages in playful behavior when he's outside, so I made sure to take him on plenty of walks. To be honest, Roscoe and my wife weren't as excited to be together. They'd butt heads like cats and dogs. I tried numerous times to get them acquainted. Roscoe would nearly bark himself to death if my wife even tried to touch him. He snapped at her fingers as if she were poisonous. I thought I'd give them a few days, but things just got worse. He couldn't even be in the same room with her, and if my wife arrived home before me, he would litter his box with bodily waste. He'd be covered in poop and barking uncontrollably when I got home. On the bright side, I became more adept at giving him a bath. I ended up hiring a dog sitter after we returned from shopping and discovered Roscoe bleeding from his mouth. He required multiple stitches after attempting to gnaw through the bars of his kennel. Seeing my beloved pet lying in a pool of his own blood made my heart stop. Roscoe was much less nervous, and things appeared to settle down considerably. I recall a discussion with the dog sitter on the second day that made me uneasy. "Hey, Mr. Bowden, I wasn't going to ask this, but my mom insisted." I raised an eyebrow. "What's up, Emily? And please call me Jack." "Oh, okay, Jack. Well, my mom asked me to tell you to raise the price." I sigh. "Wait so I get it. Roscoe is a handful, but I promise he'll calm down with someone else in the house." "What?" "No, Roscoe is an angel when I'm around. I'm talking about your other dog." Footsteps. Sometimes this house keeps me awake. Too much noise. Despite the fact that it is night outside and dark in our room, my mind keeps me awake as though something is going on all around me. What the devil am I hearing that I can't even sleep in my own home, you ask? Sometimes it's a knock on my bedroom door, and other times it's the creak of a door opening. Sometimes I even hear barking from beneath the bed, and while some of you might think it's Roscoe, I can tell you it's not. Roscoe sleeps like a baby in my arms every night because I do not want whatever is creating those noises to find him. The most noticeable and recurring are the damn footsteps. Every single night. The sound of something moving throughout the house. It's quiet, intentional, as if it wants you to look into the source of the sound. I was awakened one night by the sound of footsteps on our bedroom's carpet. I didn't dare open my eyes. It strolled about our room for 5 minutes before resting at the foot of our bed. Something told me it didn't go away, and it wanted me to make the mistake of opening my eyes. I was correct, as it took 30 anxious minutes for the footsteps to return, leaving our chamber. I didn't dare to move afterward. Blackened footprints can occasionally be found in different places throughout the house if I'm the first one up to prepare breakfast. I've discovered them in a few locations, including our kitchen, in front of Roscoe's crate, upstairs, on the walls and ceiling, on the carpet in our bedroom, and outside our bedroom door. I could never figure out where they start. The footprints appeared to be composed of a thin, chalky dust that may have been ash or soot. Even worse, my wife never appears to bring up the subject of noise. I know they're not my imagination since Roscoe hears the sounds as well, causing him to whimper throughout the night when they start. I know I am not suffering night terrors since I heard just the footsteps upstairs during the daytime. Not funny. My wife has a somewhat conceited and grim sense of humor. I suppose you have to make light of some things when you spend your days handling murder and sexual assault cases. Though I won't claim to have never cracked a twisted joke, Sophia can go too far at times. I can no longer tell if she's being serious or joking. Most of the time, I'm able to tell she's making a joke because she has a fun smirk on her face. There are other occasions when her face is expressionless. It's a little scary. Calling her name after she makes a crude joke makes me feel like her father. But it's vital because some of what she says is genuinely wrong. It tends to become less funny when you tell the same detective the same joke about his wife's lethal DUI. When we attended his burial after he committed suicide, my wife was asked up to say a few words because they had worked on some cases together. She jokes about this now deceased man's wife in the same way. What the fuck? Not funny, Sophia. I trot down the wet, cobblestone road with a spring in my step and a grin on my face. My attention wanders across the endless procession of strangers as I brush past them, my purple cloak billowing behind me. The star-dotted sky is clear tonight, cloudless, the moon bright as it graces our bleak city below in a pale, silvery tint. Gaslights line the street, their amber glow shining through the faint mist permeating the air, giving them a wisp-like quality. A perfect night. My perfect night. I keep my chin low as I turn down a dark alley, blood surging through my being as comforting darkness envelopes me. To the inexperienced eye, these twisting pathways are a labyrinthine nightmare, but not to me. I've come to know them better than my own mansion. They are the malignant veins to the body that is this place, and can lead to every single beating organ that keeps London alive, including its uncouth heart. That's where I'm going. It's not long before the tang of piss, sweat, and cheap perfume assaults my nostrils. It's how I know I'm close. I leave the darkness and enter a dimly lit, narrow road, raggedy wooden abodes towering above, one stacked over the other, the heavens now nothing but a starry, jagged line. It's wonderfully suffocating. I amble down the path as unsavory screams and moans descend from the buildings, darkened shapes twisting in base pleasure behind fogged window panes. Filthy souls stained the sides of the road, some with arms extended in begging, others observing me from the corner of their eye in deliberation of how convenient a victim I would make. "Hey, mister," a sweet voice sounds from my right. I pause and gaze at the scantily clad, red-haired girl. She leans close, half her bosom spilling over the threadbare corset. "Want to have a good time?" She will suffice. "Don't mind if I do," I reply as I tip my top hat and give her my widest, most charming of smiles. It's a good smile. I've practiced countless times to get it right. She gives me a lewd smirk. I'm certain she's practiced that plenty before as well. She nods back down an obscure alley and leads the way. I follow away from prying eyes. "We don't get a lot of your type down these parts," she says as she heads deeper into the shadowed path. "My type? You know, the rich type. You don't have any good girls up north. They don't have the kind I'm looking for up north." "What kind are you looking for?" "The kind no one will miss." She halts and glances back at me. "What do you mean?" I stop and stare at her through the dark, silent. "What's your name, mister?" she asks, and I can hear its first delicious traces in her voice. "Fear." A smile stretches across my visage. I never required practice for this one. "You may call me Jack," I reply as I pull out the immaculate scalpel. Her eyes widen. She runs. "It's all right. I know these veins better than my own. What a perfect night." It was a Saturday morning. I woke up excited. Today I was going over to my girlfriend's house. I woke up around 6 a.m., took a shower, and watched some YouTube. It was around 12 p.m. when my girlfriend's mom arrived to pick me up. We sat in the car, catching up, chatting, and laughing. When we arrived at her house, we sat and watched our favorite shows. After a while, we got out of her bed and relaxed with her brother and his girlfriend. We watched the first Conjuring movie. I felt like a real man having her hold me when she got scared. It was nice. We decided we wanted to go on a walk, just me and her. As we made our way to a nearby park, I got this weird feeling we were being watched. It was really unsettling. The cold wind felt like the cold breath of someone behind me watching, waiting. The wind had a discomforting feeling to it, as if you could hear whispers in the passing air. Finally, we had arrived at the park. I felt her hand tense up holding mine. She seemed to be scared too. We walked to this park bench, sat down and held hands. As we sat down, I went in for a kiss, but was interrupted. From the woods behind us, I heard a glass-breaking scream, like someone was being brutally stabbed. Reluctantly, I walk over to the woods. "What are you doing?" "Are you some kind of idiot, Isaac? You hear a scream and you follow it." Jaden seemed annoyed, rightfully so, but I couldn't just leave knowing someone was hurt and needed us. "What if it's just some old lady who fell and broke her leg or something? We should go check it out." Reluctantly, Jaden followed Isaac into the woods. As we stepped into the woods, the sticks like broken bones cracking under our feet, the wind like the murmurs of a distant conversion, we felt this strong presence, as if your parents were staring at you, but you didn't quite know it. We got deeper into the woods, and I was starting to regret my choice to come in the first place. Out of nowhere, coming as a complete surprise, we had found the source of the scream. We now really wished we hadn't. As you look up at this maybe 70-foot tall pine tree, starting at the very top and leading to the bottom was a trail of blood, and organs like a balloon full of red food dye had been popped. Laying at the bottom of the tree, a mangled mess of the corpse of whatever had screamed in the first place. We didn't know why or how, but what we did know is we had to get the fuck out of there. As we booked it through the woods, we felt like we weren't alone anymore. No, we knew we weren't. Footsteps like hammers hitting the ground followed behind us. As we ran, we made a terrifying discovery. We went too deep. We were lost. We struggled to get away from whatever was following us. When we felt it was safe, we stopped and hid in some shrubs under a tree. I'm sorry, it's all my fault. I'm gonna get us killed," Isaac said through tear-filled eyes. "Look at me and shut up. We are gonna survive, me and you're gonna get home, and we are gonna be fine. I just need you to be strong." Isaac looked up, a newfound strength in him. They got up and began looking for a way out. As we marched through the woods, we heard the thing that was following us again, but this time not only was it heard, but it was seen. As we passed a tree, we looked back to see this monster, a mass of flesh like broken bones and flesh sewn to a clump of organs, at least 7 foot tall in height. Jaden stepped on a stick, cracking and breaking just a little too loud. "Oh fuck!" The beast began charging us, damn near knocking over the trees in its wake. Isaac and Jaden ran desperately, trying to escape its grasp, but they weren't fast enough. Isaac's feet were pulled underneath him, and he was almost dragged away, but Jaden managed to grab him. Luckily, they were next to a canyon in the woods, and the beast fell back tumbling like a rock down a staircase. Isaac and Jaden kept running on foot, only stopping when Isaac passed out. He fell to the ground too weak to stand. It was probably because of the adrenaline, but they only just noticed a giant gash in his leg. It was bad. You could see bone. It wasn't looking good. I'm not going to sit here and let you die, not when I'm the one who brought you here. Just leave without me, I'll yell and make a distraction. Maybe I can't live, but you can, Isaac said through labored breaths. And oh, Jaden snapped. I will not leave you here like roadkill. We are leaving together. She shed a tear, and the guilt for bringing her here only grew. Well then, let's start finding a way out. Isaac and Jaden began to walk again at a slow pace. Isaac was in a lot of pain, each step sending a shooting pain throughout his body. Isaac leaned on Jaden for support. He was sure to fall without her. They tried to head back in the direction of where the park was. Just as things got more desperate, Jaden had an idea. We could follow the moon back. It had been to the north, and we began in that direction. Not too far from the tree with the body, they were closing in on the park. Just as the tree with the body was in sight, Isaac collapsed again. I won't let you die. Please leave and live. If not for me, then do it for you. Isaac was a mess of tears, a husk covered in the guilt of bringing her here. How many times do I have to say this? I will not leave you now. Stand up. We are leaving. They both cried. Hey Jaden, Isaac asked. Yeah. She replied. Can I hug you? If I die, I want to hold you one last time. He said as a tear ran down his dirt-covered face, leaves and pine needles trapped in his hair. You can hug me when we get out of here. Now get up. I won't ask again. As they approached the tree with the body, a horrific discovery was made. The body was gone. All that was left was a clump of teeth, blood, and stomach bile. They looked into the distance. Now in the foreground was two massive beasts standing at 7 foot tall. As they looked closer, they didn't believe their eyes. The second beast was the body of the woman, like a puppeteered corpse stretched to 7 foot tall. Isaac held Jaden's mouth, worried a scream may leave her lips. That thing, it made another one. She looked down at my leg. You don't think it will happen to you, will it? She asked with a wave of worry washing her face. I don't know, but let's leave before we find out. We made our way past the tree where the body was found. We were about a 10-minute walk away from the entrance of the woods. As we grew near, the last thing they wanted to hear began. Not just one set of footsteps, but two, a rhythmic beating in the soil, a song that would mean the end of both of us. As these monsters grew closer, Isaac grew desperate. He pushed Jaden to keep going, and ran in another direction, hitting trees and throwing rocks as he went. His plan worked. Jaden was free to run the exit to the woods, and the light shining from the nearby street pole from the park was the only guide out. Jaden stopped, looked back, and began calling for Isaac. Isaac, are you okay? Hurry, please, I won't leave you. You could hear a faint yelling in the distance. You need to go, it's all gonna be. He was abruptly interrupted. All that could be heard was a scream, and a splat like rotten fruit slammed on the concrete. She ran away with tears in her eyes. She had feared the worst, and rightfully so. Isaac's words playing on a loop in her head. Live, if not for me, then for you. She feared he was gone. Just as she reached the park, she looked back, and that same glass-breaking scream from the bench was heard again. But this time there were 3 of them. They got Isaac, he was gone. I don't know what happened, how it did, or why, but what I do know is that's the last time I take a walk in the woods. I've never been very good at explaining things. Whenever I try to get my thoughts and memories out, they come out in random clumps of nonlinear mishmash. However, due to recent events, and with help from friends and professionals, I have decided the most healthy thing to do is to try to get some of it out in writing. You can't suppress memories forever. Right now, the event I can best recall is the exact night when I began to see him again. I didn't know it was him at the time. It started about 3 months after I had a phone call at work that resulted in an embarrassing breakdown and was forced to stay on unpaid leave until further notice. I'll try to formulate that event into something coherent another day. I had just gotten home from getting groceries. I felt my body ache and complain about my late nights as I climbed the stairs to my apartment, pushing the key in with my fingertips, opening the door with my elbows, and trying not to drop anything. I was greeted with a very loud meow, and the rapid footsteps of a little monster coming to see who was at the door. Too bad you don't have any thumbs. You could have me with this. I tell Charlie as I set the bags of groceries down on the counter. Her little orange and white face meowed in response. She hurriedly ran towards the sound of rustling paper bags, curious to see what was found today at the discount bin, and jump inside if there was enough space. I wrestled around with her while trying to get everything out from the bags, and after a bit, I managed to sort various cans of soup and pasta into the once empty cabinets. I put the last bit of food away in my freezer, peeling off red stickers labeled with an expiration date of tomorrow, and then opened the window to let the stale air in my apartment out. Trying to keep my eyes open, I shifted quickly through a thick stack of mail before tossing it aside to join a larger pile of unopened envelopes. The keywords and names my mind got used to scanning for weren't there. Charlie popped her head out to look at me and started to purr as if she knew what I was thinking. I thought that after being together this long she could read my mind and know exactly what I was thinking about, but with how she is I doubt much really happens inside that brain of hers. Realistically, it was probably just her internal clock telling her it was time to start the daily routine we had worked ourselves into over the past few months. She bounced behind me as I cleaned the apartment from top to bottom, went through my emails, made my daily meal, checked the locks at least 2 times. Those cheap locks always managed to unlatch in the middle of the night, and then cleaned again before it got too dark. Finally, when the sunlight stopped coming through the windows, we retired to the workroom to try and keep ourselves awake as long as possible. I tried, anyway. Charlie had no issue dozing off immediately underneath the table as I started to busy myself with small arts and crafts projects. At that time, I had a lot of issues with my sleep pattern. Every time I woke up I would feel like I had run a marathon, and since I was out of work I had decided that the best course of action for me was to stay awake as long as I could. It had started shortly after I was let go, so I thought that clearly the lack of my everyday routine must have had something to do with it. As soon as I was able to go back to my routine, I would be able to sleep a full 8 hours again every single night. Until then I tried everything I could to keep my mind busy. A random video played on my phone beside me. The laptop in front of me was in the middle of some science article I had stopped reading a couple of hours ago, and arranged in a small ring around me were various cups of coffee and bottles of cola I had been unhealthily drinking over the night. I've never had any coffee before in my entire life until around that time, and honestly thought I was experiencing a heart attack the first time I had a cup. However, over a short amount of time, it lost its energizing effect. It turns out coffee also had a limit to how long it could keep a person awake. Focusing on several things strained my eyes heavily. Instead of closing both of them at once and risking falling asleep, every once in a while I would close one eye at a time to give them a bit of a break. I close one of them, put pressure on it with my palm, open it again, and then do the same with the other. Other times I would look up from my desk and stare down the hallway to my bedroom, to give my eyes something a bit further away to focus on for a moment. The workroom sat on the other side of my apartment. Separating them was a hallway about 50 feet long, splitting off to the kitchen, living room, and bathroom. During the day, from the other end of the apartment, I can see everything. I could see the edge of my bed, curtains, small nightstand, and the red-lit numbers on my alarm clock. Sometimes in the night, when I sat in my chair and looked up from whatever I was doing, I could still make out the shape of everything in the dark. Even when it was pitch black, it was still familiar to me. I could focus and make out the shapes of the furniture and where everything was supposed to be. The edge of the bed, curtains, nightstand, the red-lit numbers. If I stared and focused hard enough, I could even tell what time it was from where I sat. Every once in a while, though, the shadows would play tricks on me, dancing in weird patterns to make me think I saw something when I hadn't. The red of the alarm clock became eyes instead of numbers, the curtains arms, and the table a small freakish body. When this happens I would take a deep breath, not panic, and instead tell myself that I have to close my eyes to let them rest a moment before opening them again. When I opened them again, I would realize there is nothing there. This was one of those times. I stared too long and started to see something form within the shadows. I groaned and closed both of my eyes, rubbed them with my palms, and then took another look. It didn't help. The shadows at the end of the hall still bent and twisted, playing with my mind. I squinted harder, a heavy pressure bored into my eyelids, threatening to snap them close again. On the other side of my apartment, beyond the open bedroom door, was a wall of darkness completely unfamiliar. Maybe the batteries ran out on my alarm clock. That's why everything looked so confusing. The red of the numbers must have been a sort of reference point for my brain, and now that the clock went out I'm not able to make out where everything else in the room was. But this was the exact thing I was worried about when I bought the alarm clock. I was afraid that the batteries would go kaput in the middle of the night, and I would wake up late for work. Because of that, I bought one with a cable that I could plug into the wall. My stomach sank even deeper as I sat up in my chair, trying to be more alert. I questioned if I had to unplug it earlier for something, when suddenly a shadow shifted in the darkness. A piece of black that was a completely different shade of black had sat itself upwards in the void. The pressure I had felt suddenly squeezed my chest a bit tighter in response. I took a hard, deep breath, struggling to keep my eyes open as I stood up from my desk. At the moment I felt either a surge of stupidity or braveness, but I wanted to see who or what it was. Suddenly the shape moved again, rising higher from its current spot and stopping. The burst of energy I had left my body instantly, and I kept my eyes glued to it, not wanting to blink and miss another sudden flinch or movement. I didn't think whoever was there knew that I could see them. I needed to call for help. My phone was charging in the kitchen, and if I was quiet enough I could sneak by, grab it, and call the police to report an intruder had broken into my home. Of course, that's what it had to be, right? Maybe I forgot to check a lock or left a window open somewhere. I focused hard, forcing my already strained eyes to try to gather more details from stranger. I tried to make out a face, height, or any distinctive, but my exhausted vision twisted the shapes too far. Each limb looked too long to be normal, the legs bent at strange angles, and the arms scraped the ground. The face, or where its face should have been located, was shrouded in a black indistinguishable from the darkness around it. Carefully I stepped around my desk, not wanting to take my eyes off of the intruder, when suddenly they moved again. They slid to the right, then tried to take a step but shot their leg too far. It slid out from underneath them, almost sending them toppling over, but suddenly freezing before they hit the floor. With a loud crack and pop it slipped back up, resetting itself with one leg forward. Panic started to slowly take hold as I stopped fighting against my body. I let my eyes shut and open again and again, hoping each time that the shape would be gone, but it still stood there motionless. Whoever it was at the end of the hallway knew I was there. They moved when I moved, and now the two of us stood frozen, staring each other down. I raised my leg to make another move, and the intruder did the same, raising a leg a bit too high to take a normal step and let it hover in the air. I go to lower my leg, and the intruder lets his fall to the ground, sliding out from under him with a crunch before pulling itself straight up. My mouth fell open. I wanted to shout something intimidating, to lie and tell them I was armed, or that the police were already on their way. Anything to break the silence before I planned to reach out and slam the door to my workroom shut. I started to shout, sucking in air and filling my lungs, but before anything got past my throat the stranger beat me to it. The shadows where its mouth should be snapped open and cracked, sending a wet tear down the hallway, followed by a faint desperate gasp for air. Meow. My chest jumped so hard at that moment that I thought I had died. I spun around in a panic to see Charlie poke her head around her sleeping spot behind the table, looking just past me. A faint meow comes from the other end of the apartment, making me spin back around to once again see the red glow of my alarm clock. 5:23 in the morning, cold blue rays of daylight forming beyond the curtains. Gradually the shape of my bed, night table, and curtains slowly come back into view. I take a long deep breath and rub my temple, leaning back against my desk, and finally close my eyes for longer than a second at a time, giving them the rest that they begged for. Charlie purred and hopped onto the table, rubbing herself against my arm and wanting attention. Bedtime? Charlie only purrs in response. She's a cat. If someone had broken into the apartment, she would have picked it up and alerted me, no matter how quiet the intruder was. I guess I had no choice anymore. I did everything in my power to avoid it, but when it came to visual and auditory hallucinations, maybe it was time to give in and get some shut-eye. Everyone has a limit, and I had pushed mine too much. I carefully took the little white noise machine in my arms and held her close to my chest, the two of us taking a moment to stare down the hallway together before leaving the room. The dark we were met with was empty and familiar like it always was. Friends and family, I am here to tell you about the coming rapture. The one where you realize nobody is going to save you, because there is no savior. The rapture where you realize there is no government going to save you. There is no political affiliation that will save you. There is nobody. You must choose yourself. You must choose sufficiency. You must decide to do for yourself exactly what you keep wanting to give to others. That's how the cup filleth up again. That's how you say cheers. Have you ever considered that a virus is the rapture? Maybe it's better I describe it as the harbinger of the virus, like the little scroll flag that comes out of the little Shakespearean horn blower's horn. Toot toot. It causes the clinging. Sickness. Sickness. We must band together. Hurry. Pass this law. Pass this pill. Pass this lifesaver. Buy this insurance. Buy this shot. Buy this to help take the rich to the bank, bank, bank. When is it an emergency? When the dollar collapses or before? When you can't tell the news from a reality show? When Luigi puts on his death stare? Maybe the virus is the rapture. Nobody is the same since COVID, are they? It's like someone ushered in a new world, isn't it? That's why it's time to join the cult. Isn't that always the answer during crisis mode? Find God. They say it's byproduct of mass psychosis that humans seek a cult leader when nobody knows for sure what is going on. That's how people get drawn to cults. When they can't tell a reality show from reality. Is that the time that happens? That's what they say. And that's why we are recruiting from our Hollywood studio right now. We invite all those interested to let us know. I'll leave info in my profile. You can get in on the groundbreaking new show. I won't disclose the name yet, but it's about a zoo. We are building a studio set that is a zoo for humans. You will have your very own cage. The system is recording your responses, of course, for video purposes. The public will be watching you for their viewing pleasure. Other special paying viewers will be voting about if you are in a cage or not. Hint there about the name. Wink, wink. The system would like us to find those willing to sell products, like pop tumblers, socks, and the usual stuff which will be gifted to them if they select to become part of the zoo. Are you in the zoo or not? Are you with us? Let us know. Thanks, management. The two men lay prone on a hill. John scans the area with binoculars while Nick sights through a sniper rifle. They are quiet, knowing better than to talk outside the compound's protective walls. This is a job that must be done. Despite all the precautions taken, sometimes they just wander too close. That's why the two men are here. They'll clear up any stragglers in the area and keep the compound safe. John nudges Nick gently, indicating a woman shambling out of the trees. A tattered veil trails behind her, catching and tearing on branches. Nick snorts softly, watching the woman in the blood-splattered wedding gown pause as she finally exits the forest. Rose smiles to herself as she adjusts the veil a final time. Today is the biggest day of her life. Today is her wedding day. She's finally marrying the man of her dreams, Alex. The only thing missing is some guests. With the recent riots, not everyone could make it. Rose understands that, but she still wishes that all of her friends and family could be here today. The carefully selected band didn't even show. They aren't answering their phones either. Still, it could be worse. Rose's smile never falters as she nods to an usher. The wedding march is piped through the church's sound system as she starts the walk towards her husband-to-be. At least they have a stereo for some music. Alex stands tall and proud in his marine dress blues. His eyes grow misty as he watches his bride approach. A part of him feels guilty, but he pushes that part down. This is his wedding day. He was given leave, and he hasn't been recalled. His unit must be handling the riots fine without him. What chance do unarmed and unorganized rioters have against the Marines? The preacher smiles at those assembled before him and begins to speak. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today. Rose and Alex stare at each other, their hands clasped. The world has faded to just them. No one and nothing else matters. If anyone here objects to this marriage. The preacher jumps as banging sounds on the heavy church door as the guests turn to look. Well, I've never actually had anyone object before. He mutters under his breath to some laughter. An usher quickly stands and rushes to open the door. Likely just a latecomer. Alex reassures his bride, who is looking queasy and nervous. She nods with a smile, trusting him utterly. The usher opens the door, then screams and turns to run. He doesn't get far. Someone pounces and begins to violently tear at his back. Blood splatters the church walls, splashing obscenely over a statue of the Holy Mother. Is that the band? Rose whispers as Alex pushes her behind him. The guests scream in panic at the grisly scene before them. They stumble backward, pushing and shoving as the rest of the seemingly demonic band appears in the doorway and rushes forward. The band attacks any guests they can get their hands on, tearing at flesh with terrifying howls of enjoyment at the taste of raw flesh. Alex draws his Beretta 92 FS one-handed, pushing Rose behind him. We have to go. There's too many. I fucking knew I should have packed an extra mag. He sights down the pistol, firing 3 rapid shots into the center mass of the cellist. The cellist rocks back, howling before rushing forward again. What the fuck? What the fuck? He mutters before shooting again. this time taking the thing down with a shot to the head. 13 shots left, Alex whispers, knowing that even if every shot is perfect, he doesn't have enough. There are too many guests. His eyes narrow with concentration as he keeps firing, his breath even and calm despite the panic hovering at the edge of his consciousness. His bride is here, and he's not sure he can protect her. 10 bodies lay before the altar by the time the pistol's slide locks back. Empty. He's empty, and there are more of those things coming. It wasn't enough to protect Rose. Alex holsters the pistol on pure instinctual training and grasps a heaving candlestick. He will not go down without a fight. Rose screams as Alex pushes her back, towards the back office. He's breathing hard as he slams the door, dragging a heavy end table over to further block it. Tate, the line is dead. Rose looks at him with wide eyes as the receiver drops from her limp hands. Alex leans against the wall, closing his eyes for a moment. It's fine. We'll wait it out. I won't leave you. He takes Rose into his arms, comforting her. He knows he's made a grave mistake, a mistake that will cost them both their lives. He can hear the wedding guests growl at the door, slamming themselves against it. It's like they can sense there's prey trapped inside, like they can smell the humanity of those within. This office is a dead end. The window is too small to escape through, and there's only one exit, which is now blocked by those who came to see the happiest day of his life. Alex takes Rose into his arms again, kissing her deeply. I do. She blinks in confusion. That was the next part. He takes a pair of golden rings from his pocket. I, Alexander Hall, take you, Rose Butler, for my lawful wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. I will love and honor you all the days of my life. Rose smiles at him, tears in her eyes as she slips the ring onto his finger. I, Rose Butler, take you, Alexander Hall, for my lawful husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. I will love and honor you all the days of my life. She sobs softly as he slips the ring onto her finger and kisses her deeply. Rose clings to him, jumping each time a body thuds against the office door. I have something I need to tell you, she whispers. I was going to wait until after the wedding, but... Alex, I'm pregnant. Alex looks at her, a brilliant smile breaking across his face. Oh, honey. The happy expression fades as the door jumps as another body hits it and starts to splinter. Tears roll down his cheeks as he looks at the door and back to his beautiful bride. The bloodied and torn hands reach in through the gaps of the door, reaching for them as howls fill the air. Can he really let his bride die so painfully? So horrifically? Alex kisses his wife a final time, holding her tightly before he moves behind her and swiftly breaks her neck. At least she won't suffer. Alex collapses onto the floor, sobbing as he cradles his wife's body. He looks up as the door finally breaks, the end table doing little now to stop the onslaught. He smiles at Rose as she twitches and growls, rising up to glare at him with hunger in her eyes. I love you, honey. He gently strokes her face, further words drowned in a gurgle of blood as she tears his throat out. Nick's finger hesitates on the trigger of the rifle, then loosens as a man exits the thicket of trees. He's dressed in what once was marine blues, and he stops next to the woman. They look at each other before turning and shambling into the sunset, away from the compound. They're no threat, he whispers to John. This is a story happened when I was around 17. I 21M was out skateboarding down the long country roads near my house. I used to pass by this old shack every time I went skating. It looked like a little white shotgun house with light blue features. One day while skating I got curious, and I walked through the overgrown grass and weeds. As I got closer, something felt off, like really off, and I decided to walk around instead of going through the front door. To my amazement, the small house was actually really long, and it even had an addition made on the side from the back. It looked like a L, but the short part was facing the road. I eventually found a way in and went inside. I had to crawl through a pile of old clothes that blocked the door, and when inside I was shocked. The house was extremely dirty, but the deeper I crawled I was eventually able to stand, and the further I went the cleaner the house got. When I made my way to the very end of the house, it looked lived in, almost as if when it was made in the 50s nothing was touched. What I found odd was the deepest part was dusted and clean. I remember going into the house around 12 o'clock, but as the minutes rolled by the more I felt uneasy. At 12:25 I heard someone calling my name, and I ran as fast as I could out of the house. As I passed the last window, I could see light outside, and when I got done crawling, I was shocked. It was dark outside, and my phone was on 1% and read 6:55 p.m. I couldn't believe my eyes, and I took my skateboard and ran as fast as I could. Weeks later, I got on an Instagram Live and went back, but the house was different. The side where the porch was sunk into the ground, and the addition of the house was detached from the roof. I couldn't make sense of it. To my better judgment, I went inside and found it to be the exact same as when I first went it, but a closet was open, and it was the only part one didn't explore. All of the clothes were rotting, but in a plastic bag, I found a black and silver pinstripe suit. To my amazement, it fit me, so I took it and got out of there. Years later, I still have the suit, and I actually live a town over from where I used to. I might go back, but I think I'll just keep it in my memories just to be safe. The hum was back, a low thrumming that vibrated in my bones. It had started subtly, a background noise I could almost ignore, like a distant electrical transformer. But lately it was growing, becoming insistent, demanding attention. Just like before. Just like every time they came. Ever since that night when I was 7, the night the lights took me, things hadn't been right. It wasn't a clear memory, more like fragments of a dream, a jumble of sensations, weightlessness, cold metal, a high-pitched whine that made my teeth ache. I woke up with a mark behind my ear, a small, raised scar that my parents dismissed as a scratch. They told me it was a dream. Everyone did. But I knew. I knew something had happened. We moved to Iowa shortly after. Dad's dream, he called it. His ancestral land. All I knew was it was the middle of nowhere, miles of cornfields stretching in every direction, swallowing the horizon. I missed my friends, my life back in the city. This farm, this isolation, it felt like a punishment. The hum started around then too, or maybe I just started noticing it more in the quiet. It was a lonely kind of quiet, the kind that amplifies every creak of the old farmhouse, every rustle of the corn stalks. The years passed, and the memory faded, becoming a hazy, unsettling dream. But the fear remained, a low, constant hum beneath the surface of my life. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of something in the corner of my eye, a flicker of light, a shadow that moved too quickly. I'd hear a strange rustling in the cornfields at night, a sound that wasn't the wind. And then there were the animals. It started subtly. A chicken found dead in the coop, seemingly untouched. Then a calf, its skin wrong. It was like it had been turned inside out, the raw flesh exposed, no sign of predators. The sheriff dismissed it as some kind of freak accident, but I knew. I knew it was them. The way the other animals acted, too, that unsettling quiet, the way they huddled together, their eyes wide with fear. It was like they knew something was coming. Then when I was 16, the dreams returned, clearer this time, more vivid, more real. I saw them. Those things. They weren't just vaguely octopus-like anymore. They were nightmarish parodies of cephalopods, bloated and grotesque. Their skin wasn't just shimmering, it was slick, oily black, like a freshly spilled oil slick reflecting a sickly moon. And the suckers. God, the suckers. They weren't just smooth discs. They were lined with tiny, chitinous hooks that scraped against my skin in the dreams, leaving phantom sensations that lingered even after I woke. Their tentacles, they writhed and pulsed with a sickening life of their own. They weren't just limbs, they were prehensile horrors, tipped with razor-sharp barbs that dripped with some viscous, iridescent fluid. They stretched and contorted in ways that defied physics, reaching into places they shouldn't, touching me in ways that made my stomach churn even years later. Their eyes, multifaceted and cold, saw right through me, stripping away my defenses, exposing my deepest fears, my most vulnerable shames. They didn't take me then, not physically. But they were there in my dreams, probing my mind, planting images, whispering suggestions. I woke up each morning with a feeling of violation, a sense that something had been taken from me, something corrupted. The hum intensified after that. It was almost constant now, a low thrumming that seemed to vibrate in sync with my heartbeat. The bruise on my arm reappeared, the dark, purplish-black mark with veins that snaked beneath the skin like blackened roots, pulsing faintly. Exploratory surgery revealed a foreign biological substance present within the tissue. It wasn't just in me. It was part of me, woven into the muscle and nerve fibers like some alien parasite. Analysis confirmed the presence of nucleic acids, but the structure and composition were inconsistent with known terrestrial DNA. It was wrong. The strands were too long, too complex, coiling in ways that defied our understanding of biology. Under high magnification, the cells seemed to flicker, almost as if they were phasing in and out of reality. It was as if they belonged to some other dimension, some place beyond our comprehension. And it was spreading throughout my entire body, yet no effects. Other test subjects that had samples of this DNA in them. Upon death, the human body, so fragile and dependent on the delicate balance of Earth's environment, undergoes rapid and dramatic changes. Without the atmospheric pressure to contain them, the body's internal fluids begin to boil and vaporize, a phenomenon known as ebulism. The lack of oxygen leads to a swift loss of consciousness and, within minutes, brain death. The skin becomes severely sunburned and begins to swell. It's a gruesome process, a swift and brutal reminder of our terrestrial limitations, which is literally the same as dying in outer space. Now, I know what you're thinking. Sunburns? In a lab? It's not the sun as we know it, that big ball of gas billions of miles away. Think of the sun as a massive energy source. It emits energy in many forms, including light and radiation. That radiation, specifically ultraviolet, UV radiation, is what causes sunburns. Well, this DNA, it seems to be acting as a conduit for a similar kind of energy, only it's not coming from outer space. It's coming from somewhere else. This foreign DNA is somehow converting something within me, some kind of energy, into something that's mimicking the effects of solar radiation, right down to the cellular level. At least, that's what the scientists and doctors told us. But then again, how does this all help me? This is actually fucked. Then Dad, he tried to protect me. He saw the lights that night, the same lights that took me when I was 7. He grabbed his shotgun, his face a mask of fear and determination. "Stay inside, Henry," he yelled, his voice cracking. He ran out into the yard, just as the ship descended. I watched from the window, my heart pounding in my chest. The violet light washed over everything, making the cornfield look like it was underwater. Then I saw them. The things. They were even more grotesque than in my dreams. Their tentacles writhed, dripping that iridescent slime. They surrounded Dad, their movements too quick, too fluid. I saw one of them, its tentacles snaking out, forcing something gooey down Dad's throat. He gagged, his body convulsing. Then he went still. "Dad!" I screamed, running out of the house. The ship was gone, leaving only the eerie silence and the lingering smell of ozone. Dad lay on the ground, his eyes wide open, staring at nothing. I rushed to him, my hands shaking. "Dad? Dad, can you hear me?" His eyes didn't focus. His skin was clammy cold. I checked for a pulse, but there was nothing. He was gone. "No, no," I sobbed, pulling his body closer. "Please, Dad, no." Mom came running out, her face pale. "Henry, what happened?" she whispered, her voice trembling. They... I couldn't speak. I just pointed at Dad. Mom gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. Tears streamed down her face. Together, we managed to drag his body back into the house. We laid him on the living room floor, covering him with a blanket. Mom sat beside him, rocking back and forth, her sobs filling the room. I sat there too, numb, trying to make sense of what had happened. Then something moved under the blanket. Dad's hand twitched. Mom and I exchanged a terrified look. His body began to convulse, a sickening shudder running through him. His eyes snapped open, but they were no longer Dad's eyes. They were cold, empty, filled with a malevolent intelligence. He sat up, his head lolling to the side. His mouth opened, and a guttural growl escaped. "Dad!" I whispered, my voice trembling. He lunged. He moved with an unnatural speed, his body contorting in ways that were physically impossible. He wasn't Dad anymore. He was a thing, using Dad's body as a shell. He grabbed Mom, throwing her against the wall. She screamed, her arm twisting at an unnatural angle. I ran to the shed, adrenaline coursing through me. I grabbed the axe, its weight heavy in my hands. I ran back into the house, my heart pounding in my chest. He was coming for me. I swung the axe, the blade sinking deep into his shoulder. He didn't even flinch. He just kept coming, his eyes fixed on me, filled with a terrifying hunger. I fought, scratching, clawing, desperate to survive. But it was like fighting a machine, something relentless and unstoppable. I was both injured, bleeding, terrified. Then Mom screamed, "Henry, the axe! You have to!" I knew what she meant. "They aren't just dead, Henry. They're repurposed." I knew what she meant. "They aren't just dead, Henry. They're repurposed." Her words echoed in my mind, a chilling mantra that fueled the rising panic. This wasn't just about survival, it was about desecration, preventing them from using Dad's body any longer. I swung the axe again, this time aiming for his head. The blade connected with a sickening thunk, a jarring impact that vibrated through the handle and into my bones. His head snapped to the side, a wet, sickening crack accompanying the blow. He fell to the floor, his body jerking and twitching in a grotesque parody of life. A dark, crimson stain bloomed on the floor beneath him. But it wasn't enough. He was still moving. That alien presence, that thing inside him, clung to life with a tenacity that defied reason. I understood. We had to go further. We had to violate. The next few minutes were a chaotic dance of desperation and dread. The axe, heavy and slick in my hands, became an instrument of necessity. Each swing was a desperate act, a visceral struggle against the unnatural force that animated Dad's body. I focused on the mechanics, the swing, the impact, trying to block out the horror of what I was doing. The metallic tang of blood filled the air, thick and cloying, mingling with the strange, almost sweet, scent of that iridescent slime. Bits of Dad flew with each swing, spattering the walls and floor. I saw bone, white and stark against the crimson. Severed limbs twitched on the floor, fingers still clenching and unclenching. Even after, the flesh seemed to writhe, as if trying to reassemble itself, pulled by his own blood, congealing and clinging to tendons and muscle, a grotesque, biological imperative driven by the alien presence within. We buried the pieces separately in the cornfield, under the pale light of the moon. We didn't speak. We couldn't. We were broken, shattered, haunted by what I had done. Mom was never the same after that. The grief was a physical thing, a weight that bent her over, stole the light from her eyes. She started drinking heavily. Whiskey mostly. It numbed the pain, she said, but it also made her mean. She'd look at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of grief and resentment. "It's your fault," she'd slur. "They came for you. Your father, he sacrificed himself for you." Now, at 33, the hum is back, louder than ever, a constant thrumming in my bones. And the lights, they're not just lights anymore. They're like nothing I've ever seen, even in my nightmares. They're a sickly, pulsating violet, shifting and swirling in the sky like living things. They don't just illuminate, they probe. They pierce the darkness, casting long, distorted shadows that dance and writhe like mocking figures. They seem to have a life of their own, these lights, almost sentient, watching, waiting. One night, she was on one of her drunken stupors again, but this hostility was expected. It was Dad's death date, after all. I was grieving too, but for once, I needed to make a stand for myself. It wasn't my fault. I shouted, my voice cracking. Mom just stared at me, her eyes bloodshot and unfocused. A half-empty bottle of whiskey sat on the table between us, the amber liquid sloshing precariously. It was the same argument we'd had 100 times, the same accusations, the same raw, gaping wound of grief that never seemed to heal. It had started, like it always did lately, with Mom staring at Dad's picture on the mantelpiece, a flicker of something dark and accusing in her eyes. Then the whispers began, barely audible at first, about how Dad had died because of me, how I was cursed, a bringer of darkness. "He died because of you," she slurred, pointing a shaky finger at my chest. "You brought this on us." "That's not true." I insisted, but my words felt hollow, even to my own ears. "They came for Dad too, don't you understand? He was trying to protect me." She laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. "Protect you? He died because of you," she repeated, her voice laced with bitterness. "You were always different," she whispered, her gaze drifting to some unseen point in the distance. "A strange child. And now look what's happened." She gestured vaguely around the room, littered with empty bottles and overflowing ashtrays. "Your father is dead, and this, I gotta deal with this shit." "Mom, please," I begged, tears stinging my eyes. "I'm scared too. I miss him too. But tonight was different." Something inside me snapped. Years of bottled-up frustration, of guilt and fear, and the crushing weight of her accusations finally boiled over. "Actually, no, fuck this," I roared, slamming my fist on the table, making the whiskey bottles jump. "I'm not taking this anymore. It wasn't my fault. I didn't ask for any of this." She stared at me, momentarily stunned by my outburst. Then, her face contorted with rage. "You ungrateful little," she started, but I cut her off. "Ungrateful?" I shouted. "I watched them kill Dad. I had to. I had to." The memory of that night, the axe, the blood, the sickening crunch of bone, flooded back, making my stomach churn. "And you blame me? You push me away. What kind of mother are you?" She lunged at me, her nails raking down my face. But it wasn't like fingernails at all. It felt like talons, sharp and impossibly strong, tearing through skin and muscle. I recoiled, the searing pain a white-hot flash across my face. My vision blurred, and I felt something warm and wet trickling down my cheek. It wasn't just scratches, it was worse. Strips of skin hung loose, peeled back like the rind of a fruit. And then a sickening crunch, a blinding pain that made me scream. She'd gotten my eye. I stumbled back, crashing against the wall, my hand instinctively reaching for the gaping wound on my face. She stumbled too, falling against the wall with a sickening thump. The whiskey bottle slipped from her grasp, shattering on the floor, the amber liquid splashing across the dusty boards like spilled blood. A strange scent filled the air, acrid and metallic, nothing like her usual perfume. It wasn't just body odor, it was something stronger, something familiar yet unsettlingly different. It clung to the back of my throat, making me gag. It was her, but more. This was the first time she'd ever laid a hand on me. And somehow this human violence, this raw, animalistic rage in her eyes, she was starting to scare me more than the fucking aliens. "Get out!" she screamed, her voice raw with fury. "Get out of my house!" The smell of whiskey and stale cigarettes clung to her, a constant reminder of the woman she used to be, the warm, loving mother who had vanished along with Dad. I wandered into town, a ghost in my own life. I had no money, no food, no place to go. The townspeople eyed me with suspicion, whispering behind their hands. I was the boy from the farm, the one whose father had died violently. They knew something was wrong, something dark and unsettling. I could see it in their averted gazes, in the way they crossed the street to avoid me. Before leaving the farm, I'd managed to call the ambulance, a frantic, whispered plea for help that felt utterly inadequate in the face of what had happened. The ER had been a blur of antiseptic smells and hurried questions. I'd lied, of course. Told them I'd been attacked by some animal outside, a wild dog maybe, or a coyote. They'd patched me up, stitched the torn flesh on my face, but the look in the doctor's eyes, he hadn't believed me. No one would. The hum, I could still feel it, a low vibration beneath my skin, a constant reminder of the horror I carried inside. I slept in the park, huddled under a thin blanket, the hum a constant reminder of the terror that was coming. It was a cold, gnawing hum, a vibration that resonated deep within me, like a tuning fork struck in the hollow of my bones. It was the sound of them, the sound of the void. Then I met Silas. It was in the park, a rare sunny afternoon. I was sitting on a bench, staring blankly ahead, trying to disappear into the anonymity of the crowd, when I saw him. Silas. He was an older man, with a shock of white hair and eyes that seemed to pierce right through you. He wasn't just looking at the sky like other people might, admiring the clouds or whatever. He was searching it, scanning it, almost like he was looking for something specific. But it wasn't just the way he looked, it was what he was doing with his hands. He held them up, palms out, as if he was trying to catch something, or maybe block something. It was strange, unsettling, something no other old man in the park was doing. It was the kind of thing people whispered about, the kind of thing that earned you the label of crazy. But there was something about his intensity, his focus, it resonated with me. He was a recluse, living in a dilapidated cabin on the outskirts of town, with a reputation for being eccentric, a local historian with a fascination for the unexplained. But he wasn't crazy. He was just different. He saw the world in a way that others didn't, a way that, deep down, made sense to me. He listened to my story, his eyes wide with a strange mixture of fear and excitement. He didn't dismiss me as delusional like everyone else. He understood. He knew about the farm, about the lights, about the things that happened in Iowa. The umbral beings, he whispered, his voice hushed with reverence and dread. They're ancient, powerful. They travel between dimensions, between times. They are not of this world, not truly. They've been here for centuries, Silas continued, his voice raspy, like dry leaves skittering across pavement. Long before your family, long before this town, even. They've been observing, waiting. He gestured with a gnarled finger, tracing patterns in the dust on his cluttered table. They're not interested in our technology, our resources. They're interested in us. What do they want? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Silas leaned forward, his eyes glinting in the dim light of his cabin. That's the question, isn't it? Some say they're harbingers, messengers of something greater, something beyond. He paused, a shiver running down his spine. Others believe there's something far worse, that they're shepherds, guiding us towards some unknown destination. He told me about the local legends, about the creatures that had been seen in the area for decades. He spoke of grotesque figures, their forms shifting and indistinct, their presence heralded by the hum and the violet lights. He said they were drawn to the farm, drawn to me. He said my altered DNA, that thing they put inside me, it was like a beacon calling them back. Silas had a plan. A crazy plan. He wanted to use me as bait. He thought if we could lure them out, we could finally understand what they wanted, what they were doing. He believed they were connected to something vast, something ancient, something that existed beyond human comprehension. He called it the awakening. They're not just aliens, Silas explained, his voice hushed with awe. They exist outside of our linear time. They slip between moments, between realities. They're what some call prophets of simulation, beings who manipulate the very fabric of existence. They travel not through galaxies, but through matrices, through layers of reality, between moments in time. They are beyond our understanding. I was terrified, but I was also desperate. I needed answers. I needed to know why they chose me, why they destroyed my family, why they filled my life with a dread that never left me, a fear that burrowed into my soul and made a home there. So tonight we're going back to the cornfield, Silas said, his voice barely a whisper. He stared out the window, his gaze fixed on the darkening sky. We're going to face them. I knew who he meant. The aliens. The things that had haunted his life for decades. The things that had taken his family. You think they'll be there? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Silas nodded slowly, a single tear tracing a path down his weathered cheek. They took my wife, he said, his voice thick with grief, each word a heavy weight. And my daughter. Emily, they never found her. He turned, and for a moment, I saw the raw, unfiltered pain that had driven him for all these years. Do you know what it's like, Henry? He asked, his voice cracking. To see what they did to her. It wasn't just death. It was violation. The pull, it was so strong. They ripped her out of her skin. Like pulling a sock off inside out. That's what fell on me. Just the skin. A wet, bloody thing. He closed his eyes, his face contorting in a silent scream. But that wasn't even the worst part. The screaming. Henry, I can still hear her screaming. Even after her skin was gone, her body, it just combusted. Exploded. Like a balloon filled with blood. Just poof. A mist. A red rain all over me. He opened his eyes again, and they were filled with a desperate plea. And then the men in black. They were there so fast. Like they knew. Like they were waiting. They told me, they warned me to keep quiet. Said it was for my own good. For Emily's memory. But how can I honor her memory by pretending she just disappeared? His voice dropped to a whisper. Emily's gone, Henry. I know that. But maybe I can find some answers. Maybe I can finally understand why. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a desperate resolve. And maybe, he added, a chilling edge to his voice, maybe I can make them pay. He paused, a dark premonition hanging heavy in the air. But I have a feeling, he finished, that this time I won't be coming back. The corn stalks tower around us, a whispering labyrinth in the inky blackness. It's a different kind of dark out here, a thick, suffocating darkness that swallows the light of our flashlights whole. The air hangs heavy and still, charged with an unnatural electricity that makes the hairs on my arms stand on end. Above, the stars glitter like a million icy eyes, but it's hard to tell which ones are stars and which ones aren't. The silence is unnerving too. Not a cricket's chirp, not a rustle of leaves, just the faint, almost imperceptible hum that vibrates deep in my bones. It's as if the whole world is holding its breath. Then, the lights appear. They descend silently, impossibly, piercing the darkness like malevolent stars falling from the sky. They're too bright, too focused, too wrong. And then they take Silas. It happens so fast. One moment he's beside me, his hand gripping my arm, the next he's gone. There's no scream, no struggle, just a sudden, violent snap as he's yanked upwards, vanishing into the blinding light as if he's been plucked from the earth by an invisible hand. It's like he was never even there. But I can't hear him. He screams a raw, animalistic sound that's cut short as he's yanked upwards, his body twisting and contorting in the violet light. He's silhouetted against the underside of the craft, a writhing, struggling form that's pulled inside with terrifying speed. Then silence. An unnerving, absolute silence that's broken only by the low hum of the ship. My breath hitches in my throat. I know I should run. Every instinct screams at me to turn and flee, to put as much distance as possible between myself and whatever horror just claimed Silas. But my feet are rooted to the spot. I can't move. I'm transfixed, paralyzed by a terror so profound it transcends fear. It's a morbid curiosity, a dreadful fascination with the unknown that keeps me rooted to the spot. The ship remains hovering above the cornfield for what feels like an eternity, the violet light pulsating like a diseased heart. Then, with a sickening thud, something falls from the sky. It lands in the cornfield, a few feet away from me. It's Silas. But it's not Silas. Not anymore. His skin, it's like it's been peeled back, revealing the raw, glistening muscle beneath. His eyes are gone, just empty sockets staring up at the sky. And from his mouth, a thick, viscous ooze spills out, shimmering in the moonlight. He's still alive somehow, his chest rising and falling in shallow, ragged breaths. But he's not Silas. He's a puppet, a grotesque husk animated by something alien. A low growl rumbles from his throat, a sound that's not human. He tries to sit up, his movements jerky and unnatural. He looks at me, or rather, the thing inside him looks at me, and a wave of pure, unadulterated terror washes over me. Those empty sockets, they see me. They see through me. I back away, my heart hammering against my ribs. I want to run, but my legs feel like lead. I know with a chilling certainty that I'm next. And then I hear it. A whisper in the wind, a voice that's both familiar and utterly alien. It's my mother's voice, but twisted, distorted, corrupted. Henry, it whispers, "Come home." I don't know what's waiting for me at the farmhouse, but I know with a certainty that chills me to the bone that whatever it is, it's not human. And it's waiting for me. It's always been waiting for me. I run, my heart pounding. I don't look back. I run as fast as my legs will carry me. The image of Silas's mutilated body and the sound of my mother's corrupted voice driving me on. I run until I collapse, gasping for breath, my lungs burning. But the voice that lingers, "Henry, come home." It's a siren's call, a twisted promise of comfort that tugs at the frayed edges of my sanity. I know it's a trap, but the loneliness, the gnawing ache for some semblance of family, is too strong to resist. I force myself to my feet and start walking. Back towards the farmhouse. Back towards the darkness. The house is quiet when I arrive. No lights, no sound. Just the hum, louder now, a constant vibration that seems to emanate from the very walls. I push the door open and step inside. "Mom." I call out, my voice trembling. "Henry." Her voice. It sounds normal. Relieved. "I'm home," I say, stepping further into the house. The moonlight spills through the living room window, casting long, eerie shadows. Everything looks normal. Almost too normal. "I'm in here, honey," she calls, her voice coming from the kitchen. "I'm making some tea. Come on in." I walk towards the kitchen, my footsteps echoing on the wooden floor. "Mom, I start, but the words catch in my throat. She's there, standing by the stove, her back to me. She's wearing her old robe, the one she always wore when she was reading before bed. She's humming softly to herself. "Mom," I say again, my voice barely a whisper. She turns and smiles. It's Mom's smile. Or at least, it looks like Mom's smile. It's almost perfect. "Henry," she says, her voice warm and welcoming. "I'm so glad you're back. I missed you," I say, my voice choked with emotion. "I missed you too, honey," she replies, her eyes glistening in the dim light. "I was wrong. I'm so sorry." I take a step towards her, and she reaches out to take my hand. As our fingers brush, I notice something. Something off. Her skin. It's too smooth, too seamless. And her eyes, they're Mom's eyes, but they're also different. Colder. More distant. The hum intensifies, vibrating through the floorboards, through my bones. "Henry, come home." I take another step back, my heart pounding in my chest. "Mom, what's wrong with your skin?" Her smile falters, just for a moment. Then it widens, becoming something predatory. "Nothing, honey," she says, her voice now a low, guttural purr. "Everything is perfect." And then, right before my eyes, she peels it off. It's like watching someone shuck an ear of corn, only instead of kernels, it's flesh. Mom's skin, perfectly preserved, comes away from her body in one sickening piece, revealing the thing beneath. It's not human. It's not even close. Its form shimmers, the edges blurring, shifting. It's something alien, something monstrous. The last thing I hear is the hum, growing louder, drowning out everything else. Then darkness. A few years ago, I moved into a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood. The building was old, but the rent was affordable, and the location was perfect. My neighbors seemed normal, too. Everyone kept to themselves, and there was an eerie but comfortable silence in the hallways. However, there was one neighbor who stood out, an older man who lived in the unit next to mine. I'd never seen him in person, just heard muffled noises through the walls. Late-night footsteps, the sound of furniture scraping and soft whispers. At first, I didn't think much of it. It could have been the old pipes, or maybe the man had a TV on low. But then I started noticing something strange. Every time I walked past his door, there would be a faint smell of something metallic. It wasn't always there, but when it was, it lingered. One evening, after a few weeks of this odd behavior, I decided to knock on his door. No one answered, but the door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open, and what I saw froze me in place. The apartment was completely empty, except for a small pile of old newspapers in the corner and some yellowing curtains fluttering by the window. But that wasn't what sent chills down my spine. What caught my attention was the floor. There were strange, dark stains all over it. As I took a step closer, I realized the smell was stronger now, and the stains, they weren't just dirt. I backed out of the apartment, closing the door behind me. I went straight to the building manager and told them about the situation. When they sent maintenance to check the apartment, they found the man's belongings, but there was no sign of him. They never found out where he went. But to this day, whenever I walk past that apartment, the smell still lingers in the hallway, like something just isn't quite right. I don't know what happened to the old man, and I don't think I ever want to find out. In the mountain wilderness of British Columbia, Canada, a group of Girl Guides were on their annual winter campout. The trip was to last a week. They would hike for 2 days into the snowy wilderness, stay a third day at a remote cabin, and then start the journey back. Only the best, oldest guides, who were rangers, were allowed to make the trip. Each autumn, the girls who wanted to go on the campout had to pass a rigorous survival test. Leading the group was a native named Katuni, a member of the Nez Perce tribe. An expert on the wilderness, Katuni was the descendant of the people who had lived here long before the white man had come. He knew all of the stories and legends about the mountains. Many rangers made the long trip just to listen to Katuni tell his stories. After 2 full days of hiking and an overnight stay in the pup tents, the rangers reached the remote cabin. To the weary girls, it looked like a castle. Inside were a number of bunk beds, on which they rolled out their sleeping bags. Soon, a huge fire was roaring in the stone fireplace. The rangers were able to thaw out in front of the fire and cook a hot meal. The cabin seemed like a safe and cozy haven. A low-level howl was heard, like the kind you hear at night in a building when the wind was blowing hard. Katuni sat upright, cocking his head, his hand held to his ear. The rangers started to murmur. "Quiet," commanded the Katuni. The howling started again. The unearthly cry echoed throughout the night. "A wolf," said the Katuni. "Enough stories. Time for sleep." The rangers crawled into their sleeping bags, but it was a long while before anyone fell asleep. The next day, the girls had forgotten all about the wolf. They romped in the snow, cut firewood, and cleaned out the cabin. They were so busy that they didn't notice that Katuni had wandered off alone. By supper time, groups of 2 and 3 girls were going off in different directions, calling for Katuni. They returned at dark. Their leader was nowhere to be found. The girls ate their supper in silence. Some of the younger rangers were frightened. The older girls tried to quiet their fears. "Katuni knows how to take care of themselves," said one. "He'll be back soon." "Yeah, but why did they leave us alone?" asked another. No one had an answer. During the evening, the rangers took turns looking out the window, shining a torch into the woods. As the sun had set, it had begun to snow, lightly at first, but more heavily now. The torch beam reflected only the large, fluffy snowflakes. In a corner of the room, 3 of the rangers tried to figure out what to do next. The guides had planned to stay in the cabin 2 nights and 1 day. They were due to leave tomorrow. Instead, they would have to stay and send out search and rescue parties to look for Katuni. But on the following day, they would have to start their hike back. They did not have enough food to stay any longer. As the girls made their plans, the forest suddenly echoed with the same howl everyone had heard the night before. "That doesn't sound like a wolf to me," one ranger told the other. "It doesn't even sound like a coyote," replied another. "It almost sounds human." The rangers broke into the search and rescue parties the next day. They wandered about the forest all day, calling Katuni's name, but the search was fruitless. The snow continued to fall, and by evening, nearly a foot of snow had been added to what was already on the ground. The younger girls were clearly worried about Katuni, although they had confidence the rangers would get them back home safely. It was dark when the rangers were finishing their supper. The snow had stopped falling, and the sky had cleared. A full moon cast a bluish light on the new falling snow. The low-leveled howling began again. The girls froze when they heard the howl. This time, they were sure it was much closer. Too close. With no warning whatsoever, the door of the cabin burst open. Standing in the doorway was Katuni. His heavy coat was shredded and stained with blood. His face had been mauled. He stumbled weakly and grabbed the door for support. "The Manaha," he groaned. In another moment, he slid to the floor. Behind him stood a large creature. It was on all fours. It had the body of an elk, but much larger and covered with fur. It had large claws and could stand and walk on its hind legs. Its front paws bore large, very long claws, which looked razor-sharp. It gave off a choking stench. 3 days later, a couple of forest rangers made it to the cabin on snowmobiles. Alarmed when the girls hadn't returned, the rangers' parents had alerted the police. Calling to the girls, the forest rangers approached the cabin. They pushed open the door and looked around in surprise. The girls' sleeping bags were still spread out on the bunks. Remnants of food lay half-eaten in the mess kits. Coats and boots were scattered about, but there was no sign of life. Only a small blood stain on the floor by the door pointed to foul play. The rangers had simply vanished. The forest rangers circled the area on the snowmobiles. They noticed large, long claw marks gnashed on the back of the cabin, but there were no leads to follow. The snowstorm covered any tracks that might have been there. Using their mobile radios, they called back their unfortunately news. Then they prepared to stay the night. The forest rangers had just finished eating supper when they heard it, the long, low-level howling. To whom it may concern, attached below you will find the personal record of Mr. Thomas P. Howard. February 11th, 2025, 9:30 a.m. I'm about to hit the road. Rick asked us all to be in Nashville no later than 6. He wants to do a few practice runs before the show tonight. Looks like I'll be a little bit late, but whatever. He's the one who recommended I get my strings replaced at the joint 3 hours away from the airport. I feel tired, and not just physically. I think the late nights are catching up to me. Damn, am I getting old already? Weather is shit. It's been nothing but thunder and rain for the past week. I'm starting to forget what the sun looks like. 12 p.m. I'm behind the wheel right now. I'm sure Dr. Allison wouldn't approve, but it's not like it matters anyway. Traffic hasn't budged in like an hour. And this is supposed to help with my mental health after all. Still makes me feel like an idiot, though. Writing down my feelings like some middle schooler. I'm annoyed. I should be halfway there by now, but they'll have to start without me. The way the roads are right now, I won't be there until way after dark. 3 p.m. The guys are pissed at me, saying we might have to cancel the show. What do they want from me? If I could make the trip go by faster, I would. At least the traffic cleared up. That's more than I can say for the weather, though. It's pouring. I can barely see 10 feet in front of me. Hey, they say look at the bright side, right? Free car wash. 7:30 p.m. I give up. Destiny did not intend for this show to happen, because some higher power has it out for me today. Traffic, storms, now my tire. Either I'm the unluckiest man alive, or I'm just not supposed to be in Nashville tonight. It's getting dark. I think I'll pull off the highway and look for a motel or something. It's barren out here, though. Not sure if I'll have any luck. I do not want to sleep in my car again. It gets way too cold. 8:50 p.m. Found a spot. Big one, too. None of this Motel 6 BS. Place is called the Greystone Hotel. I have no idea what it's doing all the way out here. It looks like it should be on the Vegas Strip. The thing's so tall I damn near couldn't see the top from outside. But sadly, size does not equal quality in this case. Greystone is a good name. The place is like a tombstone. Everything is stuffy and outdated. I feel like I'm in the 50s. Even the air is dry. The lady at the counter was hot, but the weird bellhop kept staring at me with his bulgy eyes. There's something off about that one, I can tell. He's all hunched over and twitchy. When he talks to me, his sentences start off as a mumble, and then kind of crescendo at the end. He's got bad manners too, very pushy. He kept mumbling to me about ringing a bell. I tried to tip him, but he didn't seem interested. The walk up to my room was cool, other than that. This place is even bigger on the inside. I literally couldn't see the end of my hallway. It just kept going. I didn't time it, obviously, but the elevator ride felt like hours. But again, I wish they'd do some redecorating. It's all red colors with these incredibly tacky patterns on the wallpaper and carpets. I'm amazed at how many guests they must have, though. Every room I heard from on our walk up here was banging, bumping, or screaming. It's not even that late yet, way too early to be getting busy, night's still young. I just got to my room. I'm gonna shower. I'll do my nightly before bed update that Dr. Allison always nags me about before I sleep. 11:30 p.m. I settled into the room. Now that I've had a look around, I have to admit I'm shocked at the state of things. It isn't great. Everything feels fake. The materials feel like someone tried to make a room out of plastic. It's like I'm a Ken doll in a toy house. I've noticed some other oddities while I was snooping too. There's a door on the east wall that's locked. I'm guessing it's in case there's a family that wants to connect two rooms. It sounds occupied though. I keep hearing these weird noises from behind that door, like toilet plungers. Maybe they're having plumbing issues. Must be, because a big section of that wall is gooey. I'm not sure how else to describe it. Something is bleeding through it from the other side, like runny snot. Pretty gross, but the bed seems clean at least, even if the blankets are scratchy and uncomfortable. Oh, that, and there's this little bell above my headboard. Must be what the bellhop was mumbling about. 1 a.m. I can't sleep. The noises are so much louder now that my mind is quiet. I'm starting to think I was wrong earlier. I can still hear screaming, and it doesn't sound like the fun kind. The door on my wall is rattling too. There's this sick, squelching noise coming from the edges of it. To hell with this, I'm checking out. It's locked. The door's locked. I didn't notice it before, but it must lock from the outside. I'm really freaking out here. I'm in the corner, holding my guitar like it's a damn sword. I can hear more noises from the other rooms. Strange sounds, more than the screaming and banging from earlier. It's indescribable, and different every time I hear it. Every room has new noises. Skittering, crashing, groaning, hissing. I swear I heard a goat in one of them. But the one sound that's the same no matter where I hear it from are the bells. Every single time, right before I hear some weird shit, there's a little bell that goes off first. I'll keep looking for a way out. It's way too high up for windows to be an option, but maybe I can break the door down. It went off. My bell rang. I don't know what to do. The door, I heard it across the room. It opened. The smell, it's like acid and rot. I shouldn't have come here. It's not for us. This place, this room, this hotel, it's not for people. These other rooms, I think they're for the real guests. Whatever is in there is moving. I can hear slow, wet slithering from the other side. It's too dark to see for sure, but I can see something huge, flat and wide in there. And it's moving. It's creeping into my room, slowly but surely. If I can get by it, maybe that room will have a way out. It's my only shot. This concludes Mr. Howard's account. The personal records of Mr. Howard have been reviewed and approved. We here at the Greystone Hotel hope that you found the account insightful. We have found that rooms designed for more resilient visitors offer their own unique challenges. As always, we remain dedicated to the comfort of our guests. It is our hope that Mr. Howard's records will provide our guests with a first-hand look at our room service, just one of many accommodations we offer to ensure an enjoyable stay. We trust that the experience of Mr. Howard will serve as a valuable guide for potential guests, and we hope to see you in the near future. Kind regards, the Greystone Hotel Staff Room Service Department. This was in December of 2017. I went to a famous pier in California, and there was a performance happening with dancers. A humongous crowd was surrounding them, and they were calling in people from the crowd to make a line for them to jump over, etc. I don't think anyone else saw this because of how busy it was, but I noticed off in the distance a squirrel chewing on another squirrel's ripped-off head. I had 4 roommates where I used to live and brought it up to the 3 that were home, and no one had noticed this before ever. I looked it up online and saw an article talking about the phenomenon noticed in California. But while scrolling I saw a restaurant called The Cannibal. I thought it was extremely ironic because for the first time ever I saw a squirrel eating another squirrel. At the time I was bored enough to check it out. I was getting paid the next day around 1 p.m., so I waited until then. Those 3 of my roommates didn't have money they wanted to spend on a random restaurant, and I couldn't ask the 4th because he not only wasn't there, but was rarely ever there, so I had to go alone. I didn't even know him well. He was a friend of one of the other roommates and didn't talk much. I walked into the restaurant, and it smelled like pork. There was a glass case on display that had all types of cuts, but they were extremely large. Labeled as beef, etc., but the entire place just smelled like pork. I sat down with the menu, and everything on it just looked like a normal, ordinary restaurant. The waiter, looked like the owner or regional manager, ended up taking my order, probably just to show that he was helping out. He asked me how I was, and I said fine and asked him in a humorous tone if he had known about the cannibal squirrels around here. He said, "What drink would you like?" I told him a Coke. He then walked away, and I was confused because I didn't even get a chance to tell him that I was ready to order. He comes back with my drink. I told him I was ready to order. He laughs and says, "I'll be back with your order shortly." At this point, I was extremely confused for obvious reasons. Shortly was clearly a lie considering I sat there for about 30 minutes. He comes back with a large burger and says bon appetit, and walks away to the other side of the restaurant to take an order over there. I didn't know what was going on. I just assumed I walked in on a special day, and it was free and part of a whole, whatever holiday thing they're pulling off. Like a Christmas event or something since it was December. I took a bite of this burger, and it tasted like a hot dog. Tasted well enough for me to not question why this burger tasted like pork yet. I thought, well, clearly he just served me this randomly because it was something unique like a signature staple of their restaurant. That's when it clicked that something was off. This place is called The Cannibal. Now just the thought of this as an imaginary person burger was enough for me to spit it out into a napkin. I get up to go to the bathroom to wash the pork taste in my mouth out. I'm walking and glance into the kitchen as I'm passing it and see something like a thick leg-looking log hurriedly moved across the opening I could see. It looked like a bunch of plastic was laid out all around the kitchen too, like a Dexter murder scene. I had a bad feeling about all of that and didn't even remember or think about the fact that the food I received wasn't paid for because I rushed out. It was about 40 minutes away from where I lived, so I had some time to think about it and was getting a shit ton of anxiety about even the potential of what happened, and was occasionally gagging telling myself that it wasn't what I thought it might be. When I got home, the fourth roommate was in the kitchen cooking, and it smelled like pork. I told him about how I went to the Cannibal for the first time, and how their burgers were huge, and like nothing I've ever tasted. He looked at me and smiled and looked back at the patties he was cooking on the stove and proudly informed me that he worked there as a chef. He then asked me if I wanted some of what he was cooking. Putting two and two together, I thanked him, declined, and went into my room somewhat hyperventilating until I convinced myself that I just had a weird day. I spent the rest of the night playing League of Legends to get my mind off of all of that before I went to sleep. When I woke up, I noticed a small, neat, embroidered porcelain-looking box near my door. I walked up to it, and it said Cannibal Cuisine. I checked my phone and had a text from the fourth roommate that I mentioned saying, "Left you a gift. Didn't know you were a part of the group. Hope to get to know you better." I almost didn't open the box and wondered if I was dreaming for a second, but I opened it and it was a glossy menu. One of the items was finger food, and it looked like the chicken fries from Burger King. But the cup looked ornate and was porcelain. It had a code phrase that said, "Is your favorite color white?" There weren't descriptions on anything though, just the item name and a phrase in quotations beneath it. I didn't see everything on the menu because I eventually refused to look at any more of it as I freaked out and went to the big apartment trash can outside to toss it all after wiping it down with a wet wipe to hopefully get my fingerprints off of it while wearing cleaning gloves to hold it. I saw naked bodies in the Leonardo da Vinci Vitruvian Man pose, but without the double arms. But they weren't drawings, they were photos of actual people, and skimming my eyes across the rest, there were individual cuts listed of each body on display. Like in the squared-out section of one of the menu bodies, you would see photos of the limbs themselves named and prepared looking. I called my uncle and asked if he still had the spare room he said I could use to put some of my stuff in. He said yes, and I asked if I could move in, and he said yes. I grabbed my essentials and sentimentals, left my bed and other heavy but replaceable things, sent rent through Cash App to the roommate on the lease, not the Cannibal guy, blocked every single one of their numbers, deactivated all of my social media accounts, and got out of there. I told my uncle everything. I didn't know what to do and was panicking because that group now knew that I knew what they were up to. He told me to get out of California. I left in February of 2018. Lo and behold, in January of that year, the restaurant permanently closed. Chris Parker sat hunched at his kitchen table, the dim glow of a flickering lamp casting long, unsettling shadows across the cracked, yellowed walls. The smell of stale whiskey and burning tobacco filled the air, thick and heavy, like the weight of years that had passed in this decrepit house. A thick haze of smoke swirled around him, clinging to his skin, his clothes, and his memories. He could taste it on the back of his tongue, bitter and familiar, like the regrets he refused to speak out loud. He hadn't moved much in the past few hours, just sat there, chain-smoking, sipping whiskey, waiting. He had been waiting for 20 years, ever since that night. The night he made a deal with the devil. He didn't call it that. No, he'd always told himself it wasn't a deal. It wasn't a bargain. It was just a strange twist of fate. A one-time thing. The stock market was volatile in those days, he had to admit, but Chris Parker had been good at it. Good at it, better than anyone else. He'd always been able to read patterns, understand trends, and when he wasn't buying, he was selling. It was the best luck he'd ever had. That was the story, wasn't it? But tonight was different. He felt it in the marrow of his bones, deep in his chest. It had been 2 decades, and the contract was coming due. The devil, in his endless patience, had waited long enough. Chris had been promised riches beyond his wildest dreams, but all he had to give in return was his soul. Your soul for wealth, the devil had said, that cold voice echoing in his ears, like wind howling through an empty hall. In 20 years, I'll return, and you'll pay me what's mine. Chris had laughed at the time. The devil, after all, was just a story, a myth, a figure used to scare children, nothing more. But that wealth had come in floods. Stock tips that paid off, houses and cars that were bought without a second thought, lavish vacations that he couldn't even remember the details of anymore. And as the years went by, he had forgotten the man he had once been, the person who had made a deal so foolish, so naive. Tonight felt different. The weight was unbearable. He needed to remind himself. Riches weren't the devil's doing, Chris muttered to himself, exhaling a cloud of smoke. He was almost convincing himself. The trade had been real, sure, but he had made it. He had been smart enough to play the market, to take risks that others wouldn't. That was it. That was all. He wasn't some fool who had handed over his soul without knowing what he was doing. Another sip of whiskey. The burn scratched at his throat. The warmth spread through his chest, clouding his mind, just like the smoke that wrapped around him. No. He hadn't made a deal with the devil. He had earned every penny, every dollar. He had worked hard, damn hard, day in and day out. Maybe that night in the alley had been just a bad dream. Maybe he'd imagined the figure in the shadows. The voice, the promises, it had all been his mind playing tricks on him, the kind of tricks that the lonely, tired, and desperate could easily fall for. But why had the wealth come so easily? Why had his success always seemed to defy logic, to defy probability? Chris leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowed. Focus, he thought. Just focus. The devil wasn't coming for him. He had made the right calls, the right trades. The money was his because he had earned it, not because he'd sold his soul. But even as the thoughts swirled in his head, he couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that something was wrong, that something was coming. He glanced nervously at the door, half expecting to see it open. Then, the creak of a floorboard broke the silence. Chris' head snapped up. There, in the doorway of the kitchen, stood a man. Tall, dressed in a dark suit, his face obscured by the shadows. A slow, deliberate smile spread across his lips, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. His eyes, they were dark, empty, like pits that stretched into eternity. Chris' heart pounded in his chest. The man said nothing. He simply stood there, unmoving, as if waiting for something. Waiting for him. Chris' mouth went dry. His hand trembled as it reached for his glass, but he didn't drink. The air felt thick, suffocating. No, Chris whispered hoarsely, but even he could hear the doubt creeping into his voice. No, I didn't. I didn't make any deal. I earned everything. Every goddamn thing. The man didn't respond. His smile widened, but there was no warmth to it, no recognition of the desperation in Chris' voice. Chris stared at the figure, heart racing. The seconds stretched into an eternity. And then, with a slow, deliberate motion, the man stepped forward, his shadow swallowing the dim light in the room. The silence in the air was unbearable. Chris' breathing grew heavier, erratic, as if his chest might burst with the pressure of it all. The man was standing right in front of him now. There was no escape. Chris tried to speak, but his mouth was dry, his voice thick with fear. I didn't sell anything. But the man, still silent, simply extended one gloved hand, palm up. Waiting. Chris froze. And then, before he could stop himself, his hand reached forward. His trembling fingers brushed the man's outstretched palm. The room seemed to shift, the air thickening, colder now darker. The man's smile widened even more, if that was possible. And then the door slammed shut. The room went black. It was the last thing Chris Parker ever saw. The last thing anyone would ever know. No one could say for certain whether the devil had come to claim what was his. The room is cold, dark, without any lights, and sweats from the moisture in the air. The rottenwood stairs that lead down into the basement creak loudly under any pressure. The door leading inside is held loosely by its hinges and doesn't shut all the way. You can tell it used to be red by the scattered flakes of paint that speckle its surface. Down here in the pitch-black room without windows is his pet. A few times a week, he comes down here before bed and spends a few minutes in silence sitting on the bottom step with the door wide open. He likes to stare into what he can't see and let his mind wander. Most nights he will wake up in his bed and hear sounds from below the floor, mostly scratching and a faint dry heaving like a howl without a voice. It doesn't bother him at all, he just goes back to sleep. In his dreams, it is a warm summer evening. The sunlight has never been more vibrant as he sits on the bleachers, a smile planted firmly on his face. He watches the ball game as a proud father. He hears the sound of a metal chain dragging on concrete before waking up. Today he comes home and sits down on his couch. It's light brown worn, with small rips and tears in some places. He turns on the TV and watches with the sound off, listening for any noises from the basement. For now there is only silence. After a few minutes, he shuts the TV off and lets out a long sigh. He looks over at the fireplace to the left. Above it is a shelf with only one object sitting upon it. It is a small metal urn shaped like a baseball. The name Gabriel is scribed onto a black plate. He stares for a while. For the first time in the last couple years, he suddenly breaks down and sobs, his face now planted firmly into his palms. The tears form rivers down his face and neck, flowing into the collar of his shirt. He quietly weeps for what seems like hours before he is interrupted by the scratching from the basement. He freezes. His hands lower from his face, and his eyes drift slowly toward the floor. He listens for a few moments before his face begins to glow red. His eyes are wide now with fury. His shoes pound the steps to the basement with force, the creaking now a cracking sound. He throws the door open with force and looks deep into the darkness, this time with intent. He waits for a moment. There is only silence. I will not let you breathe another breath in this basement, you animal. You've taken everything from me. You are a cowardly creature, God damn it, he screams with a deep hatred from his core. Something in the farthest point in the room raises itself up, shaking and seizing as it is awakened. The sound of a metal chain dragging starts as a deep, dry, haunting howl fills the air like a ghastly moan. From the abyss of the corner comes faintly into view the shape of a dog. As it comes closer, its features present themselves. Patchy dark and matted hair, a frail and skinny form, ribs visible beneath the skin and exposed where the two deep gashes are on the left side. Its eyes are black and oozing, and its lips have rotted away, leaving a bare, snarling, bony snout. Its jaws slowly part wider as the growling moan rises in pitch until it is a piercing cry. Suddenly, a dark crimson liquid pours from its mouth and onto the cold floor in a puddle. The man glances over to the hatchet lying on the floor by his right foot. The blade is stained a dark brown. As the creature cries, he picks up the tool and quickly hurls it with all his strength. It spins in the air and flies toward the monster. Its momentum carries it high and to the left of the hound into the darkness of the corner where it meets the rusty chain. The hatchet bounces across the floor as the chain is cut slack. The creature pauses its crying for a moment and stands perfectly still. There is silence. Before the man can think, the beast screams now louder as it dashes excitedly across the floor. Quickly he jumps back through the doorway and spins to climb the stairs in one motion. As his foot slams the first step, it snaps beneath him and he falls to his knees. He glances back only to see dry, rotting teeth clamped down on his face. He cries loudly as his warm blood pours down his face and neck, flowing down into the collar of his shirt. His pet rips and cuts away at him on the stairs, human flesh stuck in its teeth once again. When it is done feeding, there is little recognizable of its tormentor. It stands back a few paces and waits a minute before collapsing to the ground, shaking and breathing its last raspy breath. Both monsters lie dead in the stairwell, and the house is silent again. I am Toby, or at least, I was meant to be. I arrived on a cold December morning, perfect, silent. I never screamed, never breathed. My father kissed my forehead, and my mother held me before the nurse took me away. They wept, but I couldn't comfort them, because I was already gone, stillborn. I was so close, almost alive, but instead, I am here in the Neverworld, where the neverborn wander. And I am one of them. Trapped between life and death, some of us wait, hoping for another chance. Every year, my almost mother lights a candle in my memory. I reach out, and the flame bends. Not from wind, but from me. My almost father stares at the nursery he built. I reach further, and the mobile stirs. Tiny moons and stars begin to turn. A soft jingle breaks the silence. They feel me. They don't know how, but they do. Then claws clamp around my soul. A jerk, sudden and violent. The Forsaken have found me. Souls who have lingered in the Neverworld for too long. Lost, forgotten, and decayed into something unrecognizable. They were once like me. Now they are filled with nothing but hunger and rage. They are real. They are many. I am dragged, screaming, back into the Neverworld, where they rule. Time in the Neverworld stretches wide. For my almost parents, it is years. For me, it is endless. The Forsaken use me to haunt the living. A grieving mother wakes to me at her bedside, whispering her dead child's name. I do not want this, but I'm not strong enough to resist. I visit my almost parents. Watch their grief soften. My mother's sobs turn to quiet remembrance. My father clears the nursery. They're not forgetting, just moving forward. I hear my almost mother say, I'm pregnant. Desperate to keep me here, the Forsaken's fingers sink into my soul. I thrash, kicking, clawing, fighting through the Neverworld until I feel it. The pull of life. The pull of her. I feel warmth. I fall. And then, I wake to the sound of a heartbeat. It's mine. 5 years later. The house is full of laughter. A little boy runs through the grass, giggling as his father chases him. His mother watches from the porch, smiling. Their son is happy. Alive. Loved. His name is Ethan. He is me. At night, my mother lights a candle, and though I don't remember anything before I was born, a name repeats in my mind. Mommy, who's Toby? Her breath catches in her throat. A chill dances along her skin. She kneels, running her fingers through my hair. Why do you ask, sweetheart? I pause thoughtful. Then, with a small knowing smile, I say, I think he wanted me to tell you, he loves you. My mother pulls me close. The candlelight bends, and in the wind, a whisper fades to nothing. I made it. My room is always dark, so it's perfect. I can't see anything until sunrise. Even then I can get blackout curtains. I just can't sleep with my eyes closed. It's not an option. I can't stand seeing the other side. I should explain my situation from the top. Maybe someone out there can relate if it also happens to them. I doubt it, but it's a chance I'm willing to take. It started after a particularly stressful time in my life. I'd been running low on funds and couldn't find a place to live. My mother was generous enough to let me continue living at home while I worked 2 jobs to save money. I'm a high school teacher, but I also work at a local restaurant as a bartender on the weekends. I took every shift I could so I could start my life. I didn't want to be that teacher that still lived with his mother. Didn't need to give the kids that much fuel to throw on my dumpster fire. That was until my mother passed away. It was unexpected. She ended up having a heart attack at work. The funeral was nice. I had my aunts and uncles help me with it. A lot of people showed up. My mother was a figurehead in our local community. People loved her. She couldn't walk 10 feet outside without someone calling her name to ask her how she's been or what she's been up to. She welcomed every single one of them with a smile. I'm sorry to ramble. It's just another straw on the camel's back. As awful as it sounds, it was kind of a relief. I was able to sell the house for what it was worth and got a good chunk of change to buy my own house close to the school and the bar. I thought that my stress would subside. Unfortunately, the previous stress was replaced with depression, and even more stress. I had just lost my mother, who was my best friend in the whole world, and now I lived alone with no one by my side. Dating became hard for me, especially around this time. I'm not the most physically attractive man in the whole world, but I can work my way around a charming one-liner, joke, or funny story. I can usually pick up a guy or a gal when I'm working the bar, but those either lead to an uncomfortable one-night stand, or one of us ghosting the other within a week. I will say it is mostly my fault. My continuous anxiety and depression rears its ugly head when I end up in situations like this. I don't have a reason why. It just seems to flare up when someone comes around that I'm fond of. It's truly a curse. Again though, not entirely important to what I want to say. Sorry, I really should just go to therapy instead of writing online, but here we are. I'm already too far into telling my life story to total strangers to stop now. Even if I did tell a therapist this, they'd lock my ass in a straitjacket. And I'm claustrophobic. Anyways, I lived at this new place for about 3 years. I'm still stressed and melancholic, but I am surviving and living comfortably. I still get frequent check-ins with my aunts and uncles over the phone. They all live down the coast, so I very rarely see them. About 4 months ago, I had my first incident with what's behind my eyelids. The first night it happened, it wasn't particularly noticeable. I ended up chaperoning homecoming that night, and actually had a fun time with some of my co-workers, encouraging kids to have fun tonight, while also telling them to be responsible if they decided to make the poor decision of drinking underage. Although I knew they wouldn't listen. "Yeah, Mr. Bryant, I'll be seeing you to grab one at the bar," one of my awkward underclassmen yelled as he was leaving. "Please don't say that," I said, sounding overall defeated. My co-workers knew that I was a bartender, so I didn't have to vehemently defend myself. Thank goodness. We all laughed, and when the night finished, we said our goodbyes and drove off for the weekend. That week had been pretty tough for me. Just a lot of work that needed to be done, not a ton of sleep through the week. I was actually so tired that I ended up driving on the wrong highway for about 20 minutes without realizing my mistake. I was just glad the weekend was here. I got home and immediately collapsed onto my bed. Didn't even get a bottle of water out of the fridge. I climbed into bed, shut off my light, and closed my eyes. As soon as my eyes shut, it wasn't the black void I was expecting. It looked like a hallway was just behind my eyelids. At first I thought it was just the residue from the lamplight that was still burned into my retinas, but it lingered for far too long. The hallway was there, and it was lit up. I opened my eyes just to double-check that my bedside light wasn't actually on. Maybe I was so tired that I had just imagined that I had turned it off. The room was dark, pitch black. I decided that it was probably just a side effect of dealing with annoying-ass children all day and all night. I closed my eyes again. The gently illuminated hallway returned. I wanted to try and ignore it, but I couldn't help but look harder. I don't know how I looked harder per se, but it certainly felt like I did. When I did, I saw something at the very end of the hallway. It was faded, almost like it was being censored or blurred. Due to its amorphous shape, I couldn't make it out. My eyes opened and closed all night. The censored object started to become clearer. It just looked like the outline of a person. It was creepy, but it wasn't malicious. It was just someone in a hallway. I couldn't make out anything about them. It looked like someone giving an anonymous interview. You know when they're in that specific lighting? They didn't move, they didn't speak. It was a staring contest where the timer was the sunrise. I really did try to sleep and prayed that my mind would just shut off and ignore it. But I just laid in bed retaining the feeling of my eyes being closed but not falling asleep. It felt like a 6-hour blink. I got no sleep that night. At least it was the weekend. I did have work late in the afternoon though. I was hoping I could rest a little bit. I didn't take a nap all day. I very rarely take naps. It's just not how my body works. That's been true my whole life. So, I went about my day physically exhausted. I didn't think about the hallway at all. I really had to get myself together though, because I had to go to work. I arrived at work and was immediately met with sympathy from my boss, Justin. Justin was the owner of the restaurant. He was easily the hardest working man I've ever met. He didn't take shit from anyone and always had his employees' backs. When I applied for the job, he interviewed me, and after I made him a couple of drinks to try, he hired me on the spot. He knew going into the interview that I was a teacher too, and he still hired me for weekend shifts. It's truly a blessing to work for him, even if it's only part-time. Justin could tell that something was wrong immediately. "Hey Dex, you doing okay, man?" "Long night last night, sir. I chaperoned homecoming, and then I didn't get a second of sleep. I'm just very tired," I said with a smile. I started checking the bottles behind the counter to see if we needed any refills from the back. Justin put his hand on the top of one of the bottles I was checking, pushing it back down onto the shelf. "Dexter, you should go home. You don't look well." "Sir, I'm okay. I can work," I said, trying to continue my work routine. "Dexter, I just watched you check the same bottle 3 times now. You're smoked." "I can tell. I can work behind the counter this weekend. Take tonight off. Get some damn sleep. I'll call you in the morning to see how you are." I could tell that he wouldn't budge on this. I wanted to work because I needed the money, but how could I work either job if I got sick from exhaustion? I guess this was the right call. "Thank you, sir. I'm sorry if this is inconvenient," I said. "You're never an inconvenience, Dexter. You're one of my hardest workers. I need you at this bar, bud. I want you rested and healthy. And knock off that sir shit," Justin said with a laugh. I laughed and packed up my stuff. I thanked Justin again and drove back home. It was a rough drive, but my windows rolled down, AC blasted, and the cool autumn air was a combination that kept me awake and alert. When I got home, I made dinner, and by dinner, I mean I had a bowl of cereal and then went to bed. I laid on my side and closed my eyes. Everything seemed fine and back to normal. I saw a welcoming abyss and realized that I actually could get some sleep tonight. As I started to officially drift off, I shifted my body so I was laying on my back. I was met with a faint light and the figure from the previous night standing right in front of me. My eyes opened fast and I sat up in bed. My heart was racing and my breath was short. I didn't see the figure in full, but I saw that there were features on its face. I decided that it was once again exhausted paranoia and hesitantly closed my eyes again. It was still there. If it didn't look malicious the night before, it certainly did now. The figure itself was encased in a shroud of black. It looked like a shadow came to life, except somehow it was darker than that. The only thing that was different about the figure was its eyes. The eyes on the face of the black figure were piercing. They were the whitest white you've ever seen, with pupils that matched its shadowy exterior. I shot awake and got out of bed. It was only 11:42. I walked around my house for a minute to calm down. I got some water and went back to bed. I reluctantly went back to bed and built up courage to close my eyes again. The hallway light was dimmer, almost completely out. The only thing that could be seen at the far end of the hallway were the figure's eyes, steadily blinking and watching. I watched as it seemingly slowly nodded its head and turned away. Words suddenly appeared on the walls of the corridor. "It has to be you. See you soon." The hallway light went out with a very quiet flick of an unseen switch. I opened my eyes again. It was midnight. I wrote down what the walls said on a notepad I had on my bedside table and stared at the ceiling for a while. I contemplated going back to sleep. What would be waiting for me on the other side of my eyelids? I decided to just see what would happen and fearfully shut my eyes. I saw nothing. I mean, it was an outline of a hallway in the dark, but there wasn't anything in there. I breathed a sigh of relief and was able to officially fall asleep. For the last 4 months, it's been just that, a dark hallway in my vision while I sleep. It's eerie, but I've been able to ignore it altogether. I'm writing to you now. People have read it looking for advice because the last couple days have been challenging. The light in the hallway has been flickering occasionally. As of last night, they've turned on fully. They are bright and foreboding. I don't want to risk what comes next. If someone can figure out a good way to sleep with your eyes open, please let me know. I can't keep living in fear of closing my eyes. I've always tried to be a good person, and I don't mean just tipping a little extra or buying free-range meat. In every decision I make, in every part of my day, I try to think about how I can help the people around me. I've had 7 rescue dogs and 3 cats. I give away money to charity on a regular basis, and I do volunteer work in local parks over the weekends. By every metric, I am a good person. So why is it then that when I need something in return, everyone looks the other way? Why is asking for a tiny bit of payment every now and again like pulling teeth? Just last week, I looked after the old lady at the end of the road, Mrs. Hutchinson, while her granddaughter was out of town on a business conference for the weekend. You see, her mind has started to go, and it's not safe to leave her by herself. I treated her so well. I cooked for her, took her outside in her chair for a stroll in the park, and I read to her to ease her to sleep. I didn't even charge her or the granddaughter. Well, I didn't charge them money at least. And 3 days ago, when that little boy came up to me with tears in his eyes, sniffling and sobbing because he didn't know where his mama was, I took his hand and marched right up to the counter for them to call her up. I stayed with the boy, who told me his name was Tommy, for 45 minutes until his mother came. A horrible, ungrateful woman who yanked little Tommy by the arm and nearly sprinted out of the store. Not so much as even a thank you. That very same day, not an hour after, I walked by a homeless man sitting on a street corner. I made conversation with the man, gave him my jacket which, by the way, had $40 in its pocket, and took him to get lunch. Not some cheap fast food place, but a real sit-down restaurant. These are just 3 examples out of an entire lifetime of good deeds. So you see, I am a good person. I know I am. It's not like Mrs. Hutchinson was using her legs anyways. I'm going to get far more use out of them than she'd be able to. Not to mention the service I provided. The ungrateful granddaughter didn't even need to ask me to care for poor Mrs. Hutchinson. I did it out of the goodness of my heart. And it is my heart. I worked hard to earn it. And that little boy, he has 2 hands after all. If you ask me, that's a small price to pay to ensure his safety in such a dangerous world. The mother should have been bowing in gratitude for the time I sacrificed for her and her son. And almost worst of all was the homeless man. After all I gave him, He had the audacity to call me a freak. A monster? I'm a saint. But even saints lose their temper. Still, even in my anger, I was fair. I only took half of the jaw. That leaves him $40 richer with a stomach full of good food, which wasn't cheap by the way, and with still the other half to use when he eats. I've just finished putting myself together, and I must say, these new parts fit like a glove. I use the old rotten ones as fertilizer for my garden. I grow my own vegetables, even give them away to neighbors sometimes. But I sigh when I think of how unfair it all is. I do so much and ask for so little in return. Maybe someday someone will finally be able to see how generous I am, how much I give to those around me. Until that day, I'll go on helping people, handing out small blessings to everyone I can, because that's what good people like me do. She was at the playground with her friend Henry. They ran over the seesaw together, holding hands for some reason. And then by the seesaw, Henry leaned over and kissed her fully on the lips, before letting go of her hand and jumping on the seat. Maisie stood still for a moment, confused, then ran to the other side, raised her arms, gripped the seat, pulled it down and jumped on. Henry went up, and then he fell like a stone with a very loud thud. He lay crumpled on the rubbery pink playground gravel, dead. They said it was a random heart failure, but Maisie knew better. After that, she avoided boys. Boys didn't like that, especially as she was a pretty little thing with soft, curvy lips. And the more she avoided them, the more they tried to kiss her. There was Jerry, who cornered her in the school cloakroom and kissed her with a loud smacking sound. She wriggled out of his grasp and dashed out, only to hear once again that loud thud. She knew before she turned around that he was dead, lying lifeless among the stinky sneakers littering the floor. And Michael, who stole a kiss on the bus, just before his stop. He remained alive long enough to reach the door, and then tumbled out, head first, onto the pavement below. And poor Paul. Maisie actually liked Paul. He was so good-looking with bright, sparkly eyes, and he was so kind and smart. They did homework together. They both wanted to be doctors. He helped her patiently with maths while she wrote up his essays. He would never kiss her suddenly when she didn't want it. She hoped desperately that would make a difference, inching closer and closer to him in their study sessions, letting her hand accidentally on purpose brush against his, until he asked politely, "Maisie, I've been dying to kiss you. May I?" She forgot about her curse in her hormonal adolescent delight, and leaned forward with her lips parted and her eyes shining. "Oh, Paul," she breathed, as his lips pressed softly but firmly against hers, her whole body filled with joy, and she could barely let him pull away. They looked deep into each other's eyes, glowing with young love. And then, she shrieked out in despair as the light dimmed in his eyes. He slumped over, while she sobbed uncontrollably. She never forgave herself. She gave up her dream of becoming a doctor, and relentlessly pursued another career, specializing in dealing with unwanted husbands and lovers. A surprisingly lucrative field. She smiled at her latest prey, Jason, sitting across the restaurant table. She didn't feel bad anymore. Those emotions were long gone. She had a job to do, and he shouldn't have asked her out when he was already married, asshole. She leaned in. She was busy, and didn't want to waste too much time on this one. I was deep in the forest of Georgia on the south end of the state. I take water samples for the National Wildlife Service. I also look into fauna populations. I was finishing up taking samples when I saw some smoke rising from the trees due east of me. I wonder who's out this far. I mumbled to myself as I put my samples away. I couldn't help but be curious. I had to see what was going on. As I made my way in the direction of the smoke, I couldn't help but smell meat burning. Hunting camp? Hillbilly poachers? Cult barbecue? Are a few things that went through my mind as I got closer to the smoke. It's really uncommon to come across people this far out. Usually it's a bushcraft, fishing type if you do. As I get closer to the smoke, I see it's coming from a clearing, a huge crater with a decent-sized flame. I breach the clearing, scanning for people. I see no one. I'm standing right in the wood line, kinda hiding behind a decent-sized tree. No one. No movement. I step out and start to examine this flaming burn pit, moving clockwise, circumnavigating the flaming hole. I see no evidence of people. No footprint, no trash, no tents or hammocks. The pit wasn't huge, 15 feet across and 3 feet deep at the center. After I walk 360 degrees around the burn, I stop and just watch the fire. I see limbs and branches burning. Some pretty decent sized. I'm a little on edge. I keep smelling meat. I'm looking deep in the fire, trying to see what is causing the smell. This can't be some meteor strike or caused by lightning. Swamp gas explosion, I thought. Can't be, these limbs are clean cut and bunched up in a dome in the pit. That's when I noticed the edges of the pit were jagged, like shovel marks. I can see how the spade cut deep in the ground and left a smooth ridges in the edge. This is creepy, I don't feel right. My eyes keep scanning the wood line for any movement. Everything is still, no movement, no sounds other than the crackle of flames. All the while I smell smoke with a hint of meat to it. I pull out my GPS mapping device and drop a pin on my location. I start off towards my camp. I'll come back tomorrow and check on this. I thought to myself. It was getting late in the afternoon, and it's not fun or good to be bumbling around in the dark. After getting back to my camp, I put my gear away in my tent and started my small campfire, got my evening meal ready. The entire night the flaming pit was on my mind. Nothing about it felt right. I went to sleep in my tent thinking tomorrow I'll go back and check out the site before I head back to society. Maybe I'll catch whoever started it. I woke up at 6 a.m. and poked at the coals in my small pit. Once I got the fire going again, I brewed some water for coffee and my breakfast. After I finished, I packed up my camp and stacked my gear in a nice bundle. I grabbed my day pack and my GPS device and headed towards the spot I marked yesterday. I'll come back for the rest of my gear after I do my little adventure. I get to the pit in a decent amount of time, the sun golden orange in sky. I glance at my watch, 8:30 a.m. I do as I did yesterday. I approach slowly and keep in the woodline. Nothing changed. No sign of any movement, no sign of anything other than a smoldering pit. Everything was burned down, and the flames were gone. I step out after about 10 mns of looking around, and look down at the remains. I turn around and grab a decent-sized stick from the brush, for poking, and walk into the black burnt smoking hole. After overturning a few burnt branches and some decent-sized limbs, the flames started to slowly come back to life as the embers hit fresh air. I turn around and get out as the smoke and heat started to make my eyes water. Shit, I didn't want to start it back up, I thought. As I walk out of the center, I turn around wiping my eyes and stuffy the now small fire I reanimated. That's when I saw it. On the other side of the limbs I rolled over there was a black human arm, charred black and melted to the bone. Oh my God! Oh my God! Oh my God! I started to panic. I turned around and started to leave, but then a thought hit me. It can't be. I turned back around. I better make sure and call this in. I walked back into the pit and start poking around with the stick again. I stuck the stick under the arm and lifted. The appendage lifted, burnt, and some meat on the upper arm separated, revealing bone. I dropped the stick and bolted out of the pit and towards the woodline. My mind was racing, my heart was pumping. This was something I have never encountered before. I had heard of people coming across bodies of hikers and campers that have gotten lost, but nothing like this. I got back to my campsite at 10:30 and grabbed my gear and checked my satellite phone. The battery was mostly charged. I called the Forest Service and told them everything as I made my way back out of the wilderness. I gave them coordinates and said I would meet them at the trailhead I came in from, all the while losing my emotions and panicking. I got to the trailhead I came in on around 6 p.m. I was exhausted. By then the adrenaline wore off and the panic subsided. There were 2 rangers at my truck waiting for me. After about an HR or so of me recounting the experience and showing some pictures I took with my phone, they let me leave and said they would be in touch. This all happened 3 years ago. To this day I haven't heard back from anyone, and when I call and check they say it's still an open case and can't discuss details. I no longer do that job. I don't camp or fish anymore. Now I sell cars and drink daily. I don't even think I want to know what happened anymore. When Taylor asked me out to dinner, I knew what was going to happen. Same thing that always happened when I went on a date. I really liked her though. I thought maybe that could make a difference. Maybe if I tried hard enough, I could just ignore it, just ignore her. I was wrong. Seated across from my date in the candlelit restaurant, I felt my phantom itch begin to flare up, setting the small of my back on fire. Taylor had been recounting her time in the police academy, but I couldn't follow what she was saying. The discomfort broke my concentration. As the itch's burning pleads intensified, my eyes darted around the dining room, horrified by what was appearing around me. As expected, I had begun seeing the face everywhere. It was in the pattern of our server's tie, as well as on the red tablecloth beside me, formed from a very particular set of creases. It was on Taylor's plate, as the arrangement of her half-eaten veal parmesan had created the image of a single bulging eye above a hooked nose. Forcefully, I scratched at small of my back, all the while maintaining eye contact with Taylor, trying to keep this date afloat. Judging by her newly furrowed brow, I appeared to be doing a terrible job at hiding my distress. My clipped fingernails clawed at the burning patch of skin, over and over again, left to right and then right to left, drawing a few drops of blood in the process. It was no use. No matter what I did, the sensation refused to yield. The itch always gets worse when the face is around, and the face always comes around when I'm on a date. Frustrated, I gave up on relieving the itch and brought my hand back to the table, accidentally knocking over my glass of Pinot Noir with the side of my wrist. It splashed onto my white napkin, staining it with the start of a familiar pattern. Taylor sprung to action, grabbing her napkin to help clean up the mess, but I intercepted her hand. Wait a second," I mumbled, eyes glued to the developing spill. As the liquid lost momentum, I saw it. A crisply detailed face, framed by the white material like an impromptu watercolor painting or a purple-red Rorschach test. It was the same face that had haunted me since I was 19. The same snaggle-toothed smirk with the same bulging right eye, accompanied by the same sharply hooked nose connecting those two features. There she is, I thought to myself. Nervous sweat dripped down my face like condensation falling off a cold glass of lemonade on a sweltering day. I felt my lips quiver as I spoke, forming shaky words. "Taylor, I understand how this sounds, but do you see anything on the napkin? Like, anything recognizable?" I asked without looking up, gaze still fixed on the horrible stain. Well, turn it towards me." When I finally looked at her, she was squinting at the napkin, studying the crimson design. For a moment, I was gripped by a profound twinge of embarrassment, anxious thoughts popping into my head like rapidly growing weeds. Taylor's a gorgeous, intelligent, remarkably kind woman, and I'm completely blowing my chance to make us into something. Don't scare her off. A subtle change in her expression pulled me out of my self-loathing, a small tilt of her head complemented by a flicker of her eyes. It might have been recognition. She might have truly seen the face. But I didn't remain at that table long enough to ask. As I blinked, Taylor's face instantly disappeared, seamlessly replaced by the horrific visage I was asking if she could see in the stain. My body trembled with that one protruding eye glaring at me, bloodshot capillaries writhing like thin snakes under the white membrane. Before I could even think, a familiar phrase slipped out of the corner of her mouth, snaggletooth wiggling as those two familiar words became airborne. "You're mine." I let loose a scream, falling from my chair and onto the ground. Taylor jumped out from the table, rushing over to me with a look of concern painted on her actual face, but I was inconsolable. Wild with fear, I turned from her and started to run, briefly traversing the carpet on all fours like a rabid animal. By the time I was sprinting out of the restaurant, I had gotten to my feet, panting ragged breaths as I slid into the front seat of my car and sped off. That was 3 months ago. She ended up paying for both of our meals. Not only that, but she had to Uber home since I had driven her there. Needless to say, Taylor didn't reach out to arrange a second date. There was one tiny silver lining, thankfully. Although we both work for the police department, our positions infrequently overlapped. I work in forensics, and she's a uniformed officer. The times we did see each other, both assigned to the same crime scene, Taylor would give me a weak smile with a polite wave, and I would somberly reciprocate the gesture back at her. Just another potential relationship ruined by my pareidolia. 1. A situation in which someone sees a pattern or image of something that does not exist, for example, a face in a cloud. I first saw that face about a decade ago, back when an actual person possessed it. When I was 19, my family moved to a small town near my college. I didn't love the arrangement. I mean, what freshman wants to be living with their parents? But I wasn't paying my way through undergraduate, so I had little room to complain. Ms. Besthet lived in the house across from us. From what I understand, she had been perfectly normal before we moved in. A pillar of the community, even. She was in her late 40s and worked as a professor of literary studies at my college. She went to church every Sunday, and she donated a quarter of her salary to the local children's hospital. Ms. Besthet was childless and unmarried, but that was the only societal deficiency in her otherwise perfect record. I never met that woman, though. I met someone else about a week after we moved in. While unpacking my bedroom upstairs, I heard my mom calling me. She hollered for me to come down. One of our new neighbors had stopped by to introduce herself. Jogging down the stairs, I followed the scent of freshly brewed coffee into the kitchen. Ms. Besthet was sitting at our table, her back to me as I approached. "Oh, and here he is now. This is my son, Grant," my mother remarked, lifting her mug and pointing it in my direction. The middle-aged woman shifted in her chair, turning to meet me. At first, her expression was unremarkable, warm and friendly, nothing more. But when our eyes met, something changed. Ms. Besthet's face twisted into a picture of ecstatic bliss. Her cheeks became rosy and flushed. Her eyes beamed, gleaming with undiluted euphoria. I think I even saw a tear trickle down the side of her nose before the effects of the stroke started to appear. Love at first sight and its collateral damage, I guess. As her brain swelled and suffocated, completely deprived of oxygen, Ms. Besthet's face contorted from elation into the ghastly expression that has tormented me for the last 10 years. Without a word, she collapsed to the floor. My mother screamed for me to stay with Ms. Besthet as she hurried out of the kitchen, running to call 911 from her cell phone that had been charging in the living room. Paralyzed from the abject horror of it all, I found myself unable to leave Ms. Besthet's side, even though I certainly wanted to. Instead, I just stared at her, wondering if this odd woman was really about to die in front of me. 2 words escaped from her lips before she lost consciousness, whispered from her crumpled position on the ground, her single open eye fixed squarely on me. "You're mine." Ms. Besthet didn't die that day, but when she returned home from the hospital a month later, she was a different person, apparently. To this day, I can't figure out whether the stroke caused her newfound obsession, some bizarre manifestation of her brain damage, or whether her newfound obsession caused the stroke, desire short-circuiting her nervous system like an old car battery. I suppose the order doesn't actually matter. Whatever happened that day, the end result was the same. The woman had become downright infatuated with me. Every afternoon, I'd see her at her front window, curtains wide open, waiting for me to return from class, anchoring her gaze to me the second I stepped out of my car. The stroke had damaged her nerves, leaving the left half of her face paralyzed, meaning that, when she stared at me, it'd only be through her right eye, bulging from how intensely she was watching. Months later, once her strength had more or less returned, Ms. Besthet resumed teaching at my college. Tried to resume teaching, at least. Sometimes she'd actually show up to her classes, sometimes she wouldn't. As it would happen, the sessions she missed were during the times that I was also on campus. Instead of attending her own lectures, I'd catch her peering at me from around hallway corners or through the cracks of slightly opened doors, always scampering away once I caught on to her enamored surveillance. The college didn't fire her. Instead, without warning, she voluntarily resigned. The day after she quit, Ms. Besthet went missing. Disappeared without a trace. Didn't pack a bag, didn't take her car. She just vanished. Many of my neighbors were worried sick, while I was secretly relieved. I didn't care where she had gone, and I wasn't preoccupied with the possibility that something bad had happened to her. Wherever she was, Ms. Besthet was finally leaving me alone. Or she was being less obvious about it, at least. A few quiet weeks passed before I heard a loud thump on our living room window, home alone while my parents were out of town. I had fallen asleep on the couch watching a movie, but the strange noise yanked me awake. My eyes, still hazy from sleep, looked over to a nearby digital clock, which showed it was 2 in the morning. As my vision became clearer, I noticed something that made the hairs on the nape of my neck stand on end. I saw the faint silhouette of a person, leaning against the living room window from the outside. Not only that, but they had pressed their body so hard against the glass that the sound of it had woken me up. Terror vibrating in the back of my throat, I crept over to the window. The bright flickering images from our widescreen TV cast inky shadows that danced over me as I moved through the room. When I finally stood in front of the silhouette, inches away from the glass, my entire body buzzed with fear and anticipation. I twisted the blinds open, but, to my surprise, there was no one there. All I saw through that window was an empty cul-de-sac, dimly lit by phosphorescent streetlights. An involuntary sigh of relief billowed from my lungs, and I let the tension in shoulders fall like an avalanche of muscle and ligament down below my collarbone. The relief didn't last. When I was about to turn away, I noticed a smudge on the glass. It wasn't easy to see in the low light, but once I saw it, I couldn't look away. I tried to suppress my recognition of the shape, but it was too perfectly identical to be anything other than an imprint of Ms. Besthet's face. 2 months later, some kid stumbled upon a decomposing body in the woods behind my house. According to the police, it looked like Ms. Besthet had been living there since her disappearance. The authorities eventually ruled her death a tragic accident, starvation in the setting of psychosis. I wouldn't learn this until years later, but the only thing she had on her person when she expired was a Polaroid camera. A detective that worked the case let that fact slip in passing, gushing about how strange it all was, unaware that I lived less than 100 yards from where the woman had simply laid down and died. When I asked him if she had any photos with her, he refused to tell me more. I've said too much already, sorry. From a dating perspective, my 20s have been hellish. Echoes of Ms. Besthitt's face have stalked me since the day she died. Under normal circumstances, it's an infrequent disturbance. Once a month, maybe. But if I ever find myself flirting, though, imprints of her face will start proliferating in my surroundings, swirling around me like a swarm of wasps. And if I'm ever stupid enough to actually go on a date, multiply all of that by 20. Not to mention the goddamned itch. In the end, that's what really stopped me from pursuing romance. I think I could ignore the faces, however numerous they'd become. It'd be difficult, but I could do it. The itch is a different story. At peak intensity, it's like my skin is burning from an invisible fire that won't go out. The discomfort can completely overwhelm me to the point where I would do anything to make it stop. So, I've resigned myself to isolation. Dating just hasn't been worth the pain. It's been lonely, sure, but abstaining has kept me safe and relatively sane. Meeting Taylor, however, changed things. Taylor rekindled something inside me that I believed was completely extinguished before I met her. She made me want to fight back. That was delusional. A misjudgment I won't be making again. Over the last 2 weeks, I've been daydreaming about Taylor. We've had some casual conversations since that disaster of a first date, and I realized that I've given her nothing in the way of an explanation for my behavior that night. Yesterday, though, I made a resolution. I would ask Taylor to meet me for coffee the day after Valentine's Day. Asking her to coffee on Valentine's Day would be a little strange, I thought. I didn't plan on explaining everything to her, but I could at least apologize for leaving her high and dry. Maybe pay her back for dinner and the Uber. If she seemed receptive to all that, and if I found a bit of courage, maybe I'd ask her if she was willing to give us another try. Satisfied with the plan, I continued through my workday. A few hours later, I was called in to assist with a case. A dead body discovered in the middle of a nearby park that had everyone scratching their heads. When I arrived on scene, I understood their confusion. The corpse was propped up against a tree, its details initially obscured by the tree's shadow. Honestly, it was hard to even tell it was a human body from where I parked, which was only 20 feet away. At that distance, the thing looked more like a burlap sack filled with ground beef than it did a human cadaver. When I approached, however, I started to appreciate its humanity. A fractured bone jutting out here, a few fingers poking out there. Somehow, the corpse had been twisted into an incomprehensible sphere of mangled flesh and bone. It was like God had taken this poor soul, placed them between the palms of their comet-sized hands, and rolled them until they were molded into a ball like human pizza dough. But that wasn't even the strangest part. The corpse lacked decay, meaning that whoever they were freshly dead. Our lead detective had initially assumed that we were standing on the crime scene, given how recently we had presumed they died. At the same time, the scene was completely bloodless, which argued against that theory. Not a speck of it on them, not a speck of it around the tree. No blood that we could see, at least. Despite what we all see in the movies, blood sprays aren't always obvious. I opened my forensics tool bag and pulled a spray bottle of luminol from it. If there was even a drop to be found, the chemical would react with it, oxidizing the molecular iron present in blood, resulting in a faint blue glow. Thankfully, the large tree's shadow completely covered the victim. To properly see the glow, I needed the area to be dark. As the liquid contacted the corpse, parts of it did glow. Moments later, the lead detective put a gentle hand on my shoulder and said something that nearly caused me to pass out. I hadn't heard him approach, transfixed by the shape that had appeared after I sprayed the luminol. We found the victim's wallet in the nearby brush. I think you knew her. I didn't need him to continue, but I didn't stop him either. When I saw the imprint of Ms. Besthitt's face glowing on the corpse like a cosmic stamp of approval, I already knew what he was about to tell me. It's Taylor. My memory of the next few minutes is a bit jumbled. I have a very fuzzy recollection of driving home. It consists mostly of my own feral screams filling the car with unearthly noise, rather than a memory of the drive itself. Everything becomes clear again when I walk through the door of my apartment. As soon as my foot passed that threshold, I felt the phantom itch abruptly manifest on the small of my back, worse than it's ever been before. Struggling to move, I stumbled through my apartment, scratching wildly at the area as I did, clawing at the skin with reckless abandon. Eventually, I made my way into the bathroom. As I unbuttoned my shirt, an entirely new pain came into being. It wasn't the pins and needles of an unmanaged itch. The discomfort was too sharp. It caused me to double over in agony, leaning my elbow against the rim of the sink to keep myself upright. I wasn't even scratching anymore, and yet the pain was still escalating, as if I was manually peeling thick strips of meat from around my spine with my hands. I felt the tearing sensation making a line across my skin, inch by tortuous inch. In a frenzy, I ripped my shirt off and turned my back towards the mirror, desperate to identify the source of the new pain. What I witnessed in that moment broke me completely. A laceration was forming, completely on its own, unzipping layers of skin before my eyes, the tissue audibly splitting and popping in my ears. Above the impossible wound, there was a single brown mole about the size of a nickel. There was also an old scar from a biking injury, below the mole but above the laceration, a fibrinous line running between the two landmarks, connecting them to each other like an interstate highway. An eye, a hooked nose, and a bloody smirk. As I noticed it, the lacerating paused, and the room became quiet. I watched helplessly as the lips of the gash began moving, causing jolts of debilitating pain to radiate through my back, silently mouthing those two horrible words. "You're mine." Everyone knows the old Channel 17 station. Everyone knows to avoid it, that is. Once the most prominent station this side of the Rockies, it fell into disrepute after the untimely death of its only funder. Ironically, the station's worst troubles began after it closed. Reports started coming in, a steady trickle of stories of strange figures in the window, of snatches of static on the breeze at night, of the long dead tower blinking out sinister codes in Morse. Over time, the defunct station gained a darker reputation of existing on the edge of things, where signals from other worlds break through the noise into ours. Of course, the authorities were fine to leave well enough alone, until the body of Robert Jameson was discovered slumped over the only remaining radio in the station in the wake of an astral storm. No one knows exactly how he came to his final resting place. Some say he was caught in the storm unprepared and wasted away in the station. Others, that he was seeking solitude in the desert to end it all. For those who are interested, though, a darker tale circulates, one that I believe rings truer than the others. This is that tale. Robert Jameson was an old man when he died. Old, yes, and alone. The majority were content to believe he was a silly old fool who had nothing to live for. Those of us who knew him, who truly knew him, knew that he was a tough son of a gun with a heart of gold who knew the desert like the back of his weathered hand. He certainly didn't get caught unprepared, and despite general consensus, I doubt he would ever take his own life. No, I believe that what caused Jameson to leave his house on the eve of the astral storm was his compassion. Mercy, a hoarse, scratchy voice crackles through the static, both strangely familiar and unutterably alien all at once. Have mercy on my soul, Lord. The storm is here. The heavens collide and rip asunder. I am trapped in the old Channel 17 station. I have no water. I have no rations. I fear I will not survive the night. I am afraid. The signal fades, merging once more with the noise. Jameson stood from his ham radio, his face set. He knew what he had to do. He couldn't ignore a blatant distress call, even in the face of the rapidly approaching astral storm. Packing his rations and saddling his horse, he set off from his house in the twilight, riding due west with the shadows nipping at his heels. The station was 20 miles deep in the wilderness. Dusk bled into darkness. Jameson and his horse forged on, their way lit by a sea of stars as innumerable as the grains of sand beneath them. Hours passed. The temper of the desert turned, almost imperceptibly, as the storm drew near. The air became charged with a strange energy. Time walked back, and the dead walked again. That's the thing about astral storms. They're not like your normal weather phenomenon. Thunderstorms and other weather patterns form from barometric disturbances, but astral storms are different. They're not formed from disturbances in the atmosphere. They cause them. People see strange things, hear strange things. These storms are otherworldly, and they bring that alienness with them. Wind lashed at Jameson and his horse, blowing up dust and beating them with rocks and debris. In the distance, the radio tower loomed, a dark spire against the darker night. He turned his face from the wind, pulled his bandana up further in defiance of the storm, and gave a start. Another rider stood beside him, hunched in the haze, a ghostly outline, imprinted against the air like ink smudged on paper. The apparition lifted its head, and he got the sense it turned to look at him. The edge of the figure rippled. A terrible keening burst forth from the rider, forceful, unyielding, harsh, rending the night and cutting through the howling wind. Jameson's horse reared, throwing him from the saddle. Pain lanced through him on impact with the ground, shocking in its clarity and heat. His limbs lay twisted at awkward, unnatural angles. His breath was forced from his lungs. His horse reared again, its eyes wild, and bolted. Officials found his horse when it returned to his house 2 days later, spooked but alive, carrying enough rations for 2. Time blurred with the pain, minutes turning to hours. Still Jameson heard that ungodly screaming, looping endlessly in his head, overlapping and repeating over itself. Stars danced in his vision as he stared unseeing at the sky, colors bursting in the heavens as the storm arrived in force. The night was lit with a kaleidoscopic dance of greens and blues and purples and reds, the aurora casting a ghostly glow across the barren landscape. Above the noise, above the terrible scream, rose a raspy recollection. Mercy! 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 Jameson groaned. He needed to get out of the open. The station was right there, and conditions were worsening by the minute. He rolled over, coughing, electric bolts of pain spiking through his body. The red obstruction lights of the radio tower danced with the storm, following in time with the ever-shifting, ever-present shimmering that lit the sky. A singular window shone in the station, cutting a warm rectangle in the blackness. Broken, beaten, and bedraggled, Jameson crawled towards the shelter. Every movement sent shockwaves of pain through him. The storm crackled above, his ears popping as the pressure rose. He reached the door, pulling himself upright on the knob and lurching into the station. The warm glow that he had seen earlier cut off, plunging the interior into darkness. Jameson called out, but the only reply was that of a neon-on-air sign blinking on down the hall, casting a sinister, permeating red ambience throughout the room. Leaning heavily on the wall, he staggered towards the light and pushed his way into a broadcasting room. Set up on the far wall was a singular radio, humming with power. The switch was flipped to transmit. Jameson fell hard against the table that held it, his legs giving out. He grabbed the microphone and pushed to talk. "Mercy," he croaked out. "Have mercy on my soul, Lord." I'm now an adult and haven't had any paranormal experiences in a long time. But as a kid I had multiple shadow figures that watched me. The first one was a nondescript, lanky, black void that would stand in the corner of my room and watch me sleep. It was so tall its legs went halfway up my wall, and the only way it fit in my room was bending its shoulders and head down. The feet were on the ground, the head, shoulders, and neck were on the ceiling. This one was the most common one I saw. I always slept facing my room, terrified of what may happen if I turned my back on it. If I got the courage to jump out of bed and turn on the lights, it would be gone. I turn them back off, still gone. I go back to bed, still gone. I close my eyes to go to sleep, open them to check, it was back. Stuff like that wasn't every night, but fairly common for me. One time I was trying to sleep with my door open. I watched it walk through the living room, place its massive hand on the top of my door frame, and bed down to peer into my room. This one set me over the edge. I jumped out of bed and ran to turn my light on. Unfortunately, this thing was right next to the switch. By the time the light was on, it was gone, and I went to sleep on the floor of my mom's room. I would also see it occasionally in the hallway at night, but most times it was just in the corner of my room. The next shadow figure I encountered was attached to another person. My father had a lot of issues when I was a child, and often only saw him once or twice a year. The first time I ever saw it was over summer break. My grandparents flew me out to their house, and I was going to be there for a few weeks. My dad wanted to see me. He sobered up and took a 36-hour train ride from Mexico to see me. The first few days were normal from what I remember, and all the days after my experience were normal. But that night may have been one of the most terrifying things I can think of in my memories. I was going to sleep in the back room. There was a shadow figure in the corner, but not the one from my mom's house. This one was smaller, probably taller than an average human, but nothing unnatural like the other one. Except this one was much more detailed. It's hard to explain how a shadow can have detail, but I could tell he was well dressed, like a three-piece suit, well dressed, had a goatee and a massive top hat on. The presence of this thing set me on edge, but I had seen things before and just tried to go to sleep. As soon as I did, I awoke in a dark hallway that stretched on as far as I could make out. After looking around, an ear-piercing scream erupted from every direction. A woman, dressed in all white with pale skin, floated into view far down the hallway. She looked in my direction and flew at me. In what felt like an instant, she was in my face, then flew straight through me. I woke up terrified, jumped out of bed, and ran to the living room where my grandma and dad were talking. I stayed up with them until my dad went to bed and had no other incidents. Next spring break, my dad came to stay at my mom's house for a few days to see me, because he couldn't afford a hotel. On the last night of his stay, he was on the couch in the living room doing stuff on his laptop. I was in my room with the door closed trying to sleep. After some time, my office chair, which was facing my bed, had the same hat man as last summer watching me sleep. Terrified by my last memories of him, I jumped up and turned on my light. No one was there, just an empty chair. I tried to lay back down with the light off, but he was back. This time I ran out of my room and asked my dad to do his work in bed. I went to the top bunk to sleep. That night I woke up on the bottom bunk looking at my chair. He was there, watching me, a sick and twisted smile strewn across his face. I couldn't move. I watched him remove his hat. As he pulled it up, it revealed a set of long horns. He had to lift the hat more than a foot to clear the rim of the hat from the tip of his horns. He placed it in his lap and continued to watch me. I don't know how long this went on, but I woke up on the top bunk in the morning. The next year my dad had gotten sober, and I never saw it again. Thinking back on why he did that, I can't really say. But maybe that was its way of saying goodbye, because my dad reverted back to his old issues after a few years, but that thing was never around when I saw him. I have more encounters, but these were my two frequent occurrences growing up, and I was happy to leave them in my past. But recently my toddler has been waking up with nightmares, and it takes her a long time to calm down. It has got me wondering if the figures that followed me didn't stop watching, but I just couldn't see them anymore.